The cardiac monitor's shriek cut through the penthouse suite like a scream. Graham Vale, tech billionaire, venture capitalist, the man whose fortune could buy nations, convulsed against silk sheets while 12 specialists scrambled around him, their hands trembling with the weight of failure. They had run every test, consulted every expert, burned through protocols like wildfire through dry grass. Nothing worked. He was dying, and no one knew why, except the woman holding the mop. If you want to see how invisible becomes impossible to ignore, stay with me until the end, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The scent hit Nia Carrington the moment she pushed her cleaning cart past Suite 1847. Not the usual hospital smell, that particular cocktail of antiseptic and anxiety that clung to the walls of Meridian Private Medical like expensive perfume. This was different, metallic, wrong. The kind of wrong that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. The kind her chemistry professor used to warn about before he'd open the fume hood. She paused in the hallway, one hand on the cart's chrome handle, the other clutching the master key card that granted her access to spaces she was expected to clean but never truly inhabit. Through the partially open door she could hear voices, urgent, clipped, expensive voices that belonged to people who expected answers yesterday. His kidneys are failing faster than we projected. Dr. Patricia Holbrook's tone carried the kind of controlled panic that came from years of hiding fear behind professionalism. The dialysis isn't holding, we're losing ground. Then increase the frequency. That was Dr. Marcus Chen, the nephrologist they'd flown in from Johns Hopkins. Nia recognized his voice from the 3 previous nights she'd cleaned around their midnight conferences. Every 8 hours if we have to. That's not addressing the underlying cause, Marcus, and you know it. A third voice, younger, sharper. Dr. Reeves, the toxicologist who'd arrived 2 days ago with her leather briefcase and her reputation for solving impossible cases. We're treating symptoms while the patient deteriorates. Something is driving this, and we're missing it. Nia should have kept walking, should have done what she'd done every night for the past 3 years at Meridian. Become invisible. Let the real people do the real work while she emptied trash bins and scrubbed toilets and went home to her cramped apartment where her 2 kids slept in bunk beds and dreamed of futures that seemed to slip further away with each passing year. But that smell. She'd encountered it before years ago in a different lifetime. Back when she was Nia Carrington, Dean's List chemistry student at State University. Back when professors remembered her name and talked about graduate school and research positions. Back before her mother's stroke. Before the medical bills. Before she'd had to make the choice between her education and her family's survival. The choice hadn't really been a choice at all. Nia moved her cart closer to the door, timing her approach with the rhythm she'd perfected over countless nights, slow enough to seem aimless, purposeful enough that no one questioned her presence. The invisible help doing invisible work. Suitos 1847 was less hospital room and more luxury hotel suite. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city's glittering skyline. Original artwork, actual original artwork, not prints, decorated walls painted in soothing earth tones. The medical equipment had been carefully integrated to maintain the illusion of comfort. Monitors tucked behind decorative screens, IV poles disguised as standing lamps. In the center of it all, Graham Vale lay motionless in a bed that probably cost more than Nia's annual salary. She'd seen his face before, of course. Everyone had. Graham Vale was Silicon Valley royalty. The boy genius who'd turned a college dorm project into a tech empire worth $40 billion. His face had graced magazine covers, TED Talk stages, philanthropic galas. At 42, he supposedly ran 5 miles every morning, practiced meditation, ate organic, lived clean. The man in the bed looked 70. His skin had taken on a grayish cast that no amount of expensive lighting could hide. His hair, that thick dark hair that GQ had once called enviably perfect, lay limp and thin against the pillow, with patches missing near his temples. His hands, resting atop the covers, showed nails that had yellowed and become brittle, some cracking at the edges. Nia had seen enough in her years at Meridian to recognize the look of a body at war with itself. But this was different. This was specific. The doctors clustered near the windows, their backs to the patient, reviewing charts on tablets that glowed blue in the dimmed room. They'd stopped noticing Nia the moment she'd entered, the way people stopped noticing furniture or wallpaper. She moved through the space with practiced efficiency, emptying the trash, replacing the water pitcher, adjusting the flowers that someone, probably an assistant, sent daily. The hair loss suggests possible heavy metal exposure, Dr. Reeves was saying, her finger tracing something on her screen. But the blood work came back clean for lead, mercury, arsenic. We ran a full heavy metal panel twice, Dr. Chen interrupted. Everything within normal ranges. Then we're missing something. Something exotic. Something that wouldn't show up on standard screens. Nia moved closer to the bed, ostensibly to straighten the blanket. Up close, the details became clearer. The faint blue tinge to his gum line, the way his fingernails had developed subtle ridges, the muscle fasciculations in his forearms, tiny tremors that came and went like Morse code. And that smell. Faint but present, like metal and garlic had a baby. She'd smelled it before, in Professor Whitmore's advanced chemistry lab during the unit on toxicology, the day he'd shown them samples under the fume hood and explained why certain elements, certain compounds, had been used throughout history for purposes far darker than science. "Excuse me," a voice cut through her thoughts. "You need to finish up and leave. We're conducting a patient review." Nia looked up. Dr. Holbrook stood 5 feet away, her expression a perfect blend of impatience and dismissal. The kind of look that said, "You're in the way. You don't belong here." "Yes, ma'am." Nia's voice came out soft, practiced, apologetic. The voice of someone who knew her place. "Almost done." She gathered her supplies, moving toward the door. But her eyes kept drifting back to the nightstand, where a collection of personal items had been carefully arranged. Reading glasses, a tablet, a watch that probably cost more than her car, and a small, elegant jar of hand cream, its label printed in gold-embossed Italian. The cream jar was half empty. Nia's hand paused on the door handle. She turned back, the question rising before she could stop it. "Has Mr. Vale been using anything new? Any products, supplements, anything that wasn't part of his routine before he got sick?" The silence that followed felt like ice water down her spine. Dr. Holbrook's expression shifted from dismissive to incredulous. "I'm sorry, what?" Nia felt her face heat up. "I noticed the hand cream, the Italian one. I was wondering—" "You were wondering." Dr. Chen had turned now, his eyebrows raised. "About our treatment protocol?" "No, I didn't mean—" Nia gripped the cart handle harder. "I just thought if there's something environmental— Thank you for your input." Dr. Reeves's tone could have flash-frozen water. "But I think we have the medical assessment covered. If we need the trash emptied again, we'll let you know." The dismissal was absolute. Final. Nia felt it like a door slamming in her face. She nodded, mumbled another apology, and pushed her cart into the hallway. Behind her, she heard Dr. Chen's voice, lowered but not low enough. "Unbelievable. Next, the custodial staff will be writing prescriptions." Quiet laughter followed her down the hall. Nia's hands shook as she parked her cart in the service alcove. She pulled out her phone, fingers moving fast, searching. Italian hand cream, luxury, imported. The brand name from the jar, Luminosa d'Argento, silver light. Pretentious, expensive, harmless. Except, she kept searching, diving deeper, past the marketing pages and Instagram influencers, into import records, ingredient lists, manufacturing locations. There. A recall notice from 18 months ago. Small batch. Contamination concerns during production at a facility in Naples. The recall had been quiet, voluntary, quickly resolved. Most of the product had been destroyed. Most. Nia's heart hammered against her ribs. She was probably wrong. Probably crazy. Probably about to make a fool of herself in ways that would cost her this job, this income, the fragile stability she'd built for Marcus and Zara. But that smell. She remembered Professor Whitmore's words, spoken over a fume hood 13 years ago. Thallium poisoning is called the poisoner's poison for a reason. Tasteless, odorless, nearly undetectable. By the time symptoms appear, the damage is already severe. Watch for alopecia, peripheral neuropathy, gastrointestinal distress. And this, he'd held up a slide. Mace lines, horizontal white bands on the nails, like the killer left fingerprints on the victim's hands. Nia pulled up images on her phone. Thallium poisoning symptoms. The photos could have been medical documentation of Graham Vale's condition. She should tell someone. Who would listen? She was the housekeeper. The woman who pushed a cart and wore a uniform and existed in that strange liminal space between visible and invisible. The doctors had made it perfectly clear what they thought of her medical opinions. But if she was right, Graham Vale was being poisoned. Slowly, methodically, by something sitting right there on his nightstand. And no one was looking at it because no one expected the threat to come wrapped in gold-embossed luxury. Nia finished her shift on autopilot, her mind racing through possibilities, calculations, risks. At 2 a.m., she clocked out and walked to her car, a 15-year-old Honda that started on the third try. The drive home took 20 minutes through empty streets, past closed storefronts and sleeping neighborhoods. The apartment was dark when she let herself in. She checked on Marcus first, 11 years old, sprawled across his narrow bed with a library book about space exploration splayed open on his chest. Then Zara, 8, curled up with the stuffed elephant Nia's mother had given her before the stroke, before everything changed. Nia stood in the doorway of their room, watching them breathe, feeling the weight of what she was considering. If she was wrong, she'd lose her job, probably end up blacklisted from every decent hospital in the city. They'd call her unstable, presumptuous, dangerous. She'd be lucky to find work cleaning office buildings. If she was right, and she did nothing, Graham Vale would die. She thought about that. Really thought about it. Graham Vale, tech billionaire, venture capitalist, the man whose wealth could reshape industries, a man who'd probably never noticed people like her, never considered that the invisible staff might have thoughts, knowledge, entire histories beyond their uniforms and their service. She should care less about him, should protect herself and her kids, should remember where she stood in the hierarchy and stay there. But 13 years ago, Nia Carrington had taken an oath she'd never officially completed, had learned principles that didn't disappear just because the degree did, had been taught that knowledge carried responsibility and ignoring what you knew was its own kind of crime. She pulled out her phone and started documenting everything. The date she'd noticed the symptoms, the correlation with the cream, the recall information, the scientific literature on thallium poisoning. She wrote it all down in a note file, organizing her thoughts like the research papers she used to write, back when professors praised her clarity and precision. At 4 a.m., exhausted but unable to sleep, Nia made a decision. Tomorrow night, she'd speak up, really speak up, not asking permission, not apologizing for existing. She'd present the evidence and make them listen, and if they didn't, she'd find another way. The next evening, Nia arrived at Meridian an hour early. She parked in the far corner of the employee lot and sat in her car, reviewing her notes one more time. The evidence felt solid. The timeline made sense. The science was sound. But her hand still shook as she swiped her ID card and entered through the staff entrance. The shift supervisor, Janet, looked up from the scheduling board. "You're early." "Wanted to get a head start." Nia forced a smile. "Busy night ahead." She collected her cart and started her rounds, working faster than usual, trying to finish the lower floors before the nightly physician conference that she knew happened in Suite Assis 1847 around 10 p.m. That was when the specialists gathered to review cases, compare notes, strategize. That was when she'd have them all together. At 9:45, she positioned her cart near the suite, close enough to hear when they assembled, far enough that she wouldn't seem like she was hovering. Her phone sat in her pocket, heavy with documentation. Her heart beat a rhythm that felt like war drums. Through the partially open door, she heard them arriving. Dr. Holbrook first, then Dr. Chen, then Dr. Reeves, and two others she didn't recognize. Their voices carried that particular tone of frustration that came from watching someone die despite your best efforts. "His liver enzymes are through the roof now," Dr. Chen was saying. "The kidney failure is accelerating. At this rate, he has maybe 72 hours. We've tried everything." Dr. Holbrook sounded exhausted. "Every treatment protocol, every specialist consultation. I've never seen anything like this. It's like his body is being attacked from the inside," one of the new doctors added. "But we can't find the weapon." Nia took a deep breath, steadied herself, pushed the cart into the doorway. "Excuse me." Her voice came out stronger than she expected. I need to speak with you about Mr. Vale's condition. The conversation stopped. 5 sets of eyes turned toward her, expressions ranging from confused to annoyed. This really isn't the time, Dr. Holbrook began. I think he's being poisoned. Naya cut her off, the words tumbling out before courage could fail. With thallium, from the hand cream on his nightstand. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Dr. Chen laughed. Actually laughed. I'm sorry, what? You think, based on what medical training exactly, that you've diagnosed something 5 board-certified specialists missed? Based on chemistry training, Naya's voice hardened. An observation. And the fact that every symptom matches thallium exposure, and that cream has a recall history for contamination, and the timeline of his decline correlates exactly with when he started using it. This is absurd. Dr. Reeves stepped forward. Thallium doesn't just show up in luxury hand cream, and we've run extensive toxicology. Standard panels. Nia pulled out her phone. Which don't test for thallium unless you specifically request it. It's not included in basic heavy metal screens because it's rare. But look, she held up her phone, showing the symptom comparison. Hair loss, especially temporal, peripheral neuropathy, gastrointestinal issues, Mies lines on the nails. When did you last look at his hands? Really look? No one answered. And the smell, Naya continued, her confidence building. Faint metallic, almost garlic-like. I noticed it 3 nights ago. It's subtle, but it's there. That's consistent with thallium sulfate. You noticed a smell. Dr. Holbrook's tone dripped disbelief. And from this, you've concluded our patient is being poisoned by hand cream. I've concluded it's worth testing. Nia met her gaze. 1 specific toxicology screen, that's all I'm asking. If I'm wrong, you've lost nothing but 15 minutes. And if we entertain this lunacy, we validate it. Dr. Chen shook his head. We have protocols, procedures, a chain of command. We don't take medical advice from housekeeping. The word hung in the air. Housekeeping. Not my name, not my credentials, not even my observation, just my job title, my place in the hierarchy. I was a chemistry student. Nia's voice dropped, quieter now, but somehow harder. Dean's list at state. I was 3 semesters from graduating when my mother had a stroke and I had to choose between finishing my degree and keeping my family fed. I chose my family, but I didn't forget what I learned. And what I learned is that thallium poisoning looks exactly like what's happening to Graham Vale. Dr. Reeves studied her, something shifting in her expression. State University? When? 2012 to 2015. Professor Whitmore's program? Naya nodded. Whitmore doesn't give Dean's list to mediocre students. Dr. Reeves crossed her arms. He barely gives it to brilliant ones. What was your focus? Toxicology and environmental chemistry. The room's energy changed, subtle but real. Dr. Reeves looked at Dr. Holbrook. Run the screen. Sarah, you can't be serious. She's right about the standard panels not including thallium, and she's right about the symptoms. Dr. Reeves moved closer to the bed, examining Graham's hands under the light. Look at this. Mies lines. Faint but present. How did we miss this? Because we weren't looking for it, Naya said quietly. Because nobody expects poison to come in a gold jar from Italy. Dr. Chen still looked skeptical, but he was pulling up Graham's chart on his tablet, scrolling through lab results. If, and this is a massive if, there is thallium exposure, how would it get into luxury hand cream? Manufacturing contamination. The facility in Naples had a recall 18 months ago. Small batch, supposedly destroyed. But what if some of it made it to market? What if someone bought it, kept it, gave it as a gift? Nia looked at the nightstand. When did that cream appear? Dr. Holbrook checked the patient log. 3 weeks ago. It's on the list of personal items delivered by his friend, Calvin Price. Has anyone checked on Mr. Price's relationship with the patient? Nia asked. His finances? His motives? Now you're playing detective too? Dr. Chen's voice had lost some of its edge, but retained its resistance. This is getting ridiculous. It's getting investigated. Dr. Reeves pulled out her phone. I'm calling for a rush toxicology screen for thallium and its compounds, and we're sealing that cream as potential evidence. Sarah, if this turns out to be nothing, Dr. Holbrook began, then we've lost nothing but a few hours. But if she's right, Dr. Reeves looked at Nia with something that might have been respect. If she's right, we save a life and catch a killer. The next 2 hours moved in slow motion. The cream jar was bagged and tagged. Blood samples were rushed to the lab with priority orders. Security was quietly notified to review footage of Calvin Price's visits. Nia finished her shift, her body moving through familiar motions while her mind spun with what-ifs. What if she was wrong? What if the tests came back negative and she'd just humiliated herself in front of the best medical minds in the city? What if she was right? At 3 a.m., as she was loading her cart back into the supply closet, her supervisor appeared. Janet's expression was unreadable. Dr. Reeves wants to see you. Conference room on the 3rd floor. Now. Nia's stomach dropped. Am I being fired? I don't know, but you need to go. The conference room was all glass and chrome, the kind of space where important decisions happened. Dr. Reeves sat at the head of the table, Dr. Holbrook and Dr. Chen flanking her. On the screen behind them, lab results glowed in harsh fluorescent detail. Sit down, Miss Carrington. Dr. Reeves gestured to a chair. Nia sat, her heart hammering. The preliminary results are back. Dr. Reeves' expression was impossible to read. You were right, thallium sulfate, elevated levels in his blood, higher concentrations in his hair and nail samples. The cream tested positive. Someone had mixed it in, probably gradually, to avoid detection. The room tilted. Nia gripped the edge of the table. Graham Vale is being poisoned, Dr. Holbrook said, and her voice carried none of the dismissiveness from earlier. Has been for weeks. And we missed it. Every one of us missed it. But you didn't. Dr. Chen looked at Nia. You saw what we couldn't see, or wouldn't see. I'm sorry, Dr. Reeves said, and the apology landed like a bomb. For dismissing you, for not listening, for assuming that expertise only comes in one package. Nia felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back. Is he going to survive? Now that we know what we're treating, his chances just increased dramatically. We've started Prussian blue therapy, aggressive chelation. The next 48 hours are critical, but... Dr. Reeves paused. You saved his life, you know that, right? If we'd gone another week without knowing, he'd be dead. What about Calvin Price? Security pulled the footage. He's been personally applying the cream to Graham's hands during every visit, insisting it's therapeutic. Very attentive. Very careful. Dr. Holbrook's jaw tightened. The police have been notified. They're bringing him in for questioning now. Nia sat back, the adrenaline finally draining, leaving exhaustion in its wake. Why would he do it? That's for the investigators to determine. But Graham's company just went public. Calvin Price owns a significant stake through an early investment, and Graham was considering some major restructuring that would have diluted his shares substantially. Dr. Chen shook his head. Money. It always comes back to money. Ms. Carrington, Dr. Reeves leaned forward. What are your plans? Long term? The question caught Nia off guard. I work here. I take care of my kids. I don't... You had 3 semesters left on a chemistry degree. Toxicology focus. Whitmore's recommendation, which is worth its weight in gold in certain circles. Dr. Reeves steepled her fingers. What if there was a way to finish, to complete what you started? Nia's throat tightened. I can't afford... What if you didn't have to? What if someone wanted to invest in talent that they should have noticed sooner? Dr. Reeves glanced at the others. We'll have to run it by Graham when he's recovered, but I suspect he'll be highly motivated to help the woman who saved his life. The tears came then, hot and fast, years of deferred dreams suddenly crashing through the walls she'd built. Nia wiped her eyes, trying to maintain some composure, failing completely. I have 2 kids, she managed. I can't just... Child care support, flexible scheduling, a clear path back into professional chemistry once you graduate. Dr. Holbrook's voice was gentle. You deserve this, Nia. You've always deserved this. We're just sorry it took us so long to see you. Outside the conference room windows, dawn was breaking over the city. Pink and gold light spilled across the skyline, illuminating the buildings where invisible people did invisible work, where talent went unnoticed, where potential died quiet deaths in the name of survival. But not today. Today, Nia Carrington had been seen. She left the conference room an hour later, after they'd outlined possibilities, discussed logistics, exchanged contact information. Her hands shook as she walked through the hospital corridors, past the familiar spaces she'd cleaned 1,000 times, seeing them differently now. In Suite 1847, Graham Vale lay unconscious but stable, monitors showing improvement for the first time in weeks. The hand cream jar was gone, replaced by evidence tags. But the man remained, breathing easier, color slowly returning to his skin. Nia paused in the doorway, looking at him. This stranger who would never have noticed her if she hadn't noticed him. This man whose crisis had become her opportunity, whose near death had resurrected her deferred dreams. She thought about Calvin Price, arrested an hour ago as he tried to board a flight to Switzerland, about greed and betrayal and the terrible things people did for money, about how poison worked slowly, invisibly, counting on no one looking close enough to see the truth. But someone had looked. Someone who wasn't supposed to matter had mattered anyway. Nia pulled out her phone and sent a text to Marcus and Zara, still sleeping in their bunk beds. Love you both. Big news when I get home. Everything might be about to change. Then she walked to her car, drove through the awakening city, and let herself imagine, really imagine, what it might feel like to walk through doors marked authorized personnel only, with her own credentials, her own authority, her own voice that didn't need to apologize for taking up space. The sun climbed higher, burning away the morning mist, and Nia Carrington drove home to her children with hope sitting in her chest like a bright, fierce thing that refused to be ignored. Behind her in the hospital, specialists who'd dismissed her were learning a lesson that would reshape their careers. Expertise doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives in a uniform, pushing a cart, speaking quietly until the moment it chooses to roar. And sometimes, when we're lucky enough to listen, it saves lives. The apartment smelled like burned toast and Marcus's attempts at breakfast when Nia finally pushed through the door at 7:30 a.m. Her son stood at the stove, spatula in hand, looking guilty over a pan of what might have once been eggs. Zara sat at their tiny kitchen table, already dressed for school, her backpack propped against her chair. "Mom!" Marcus's face lit up, then fell when he saw her expression. "I know I'm not supposed to use the stove when you're not home, but I thought, it's okay, baby." Nia dropped her keys on the counter, pulled him into a hug that lasted longer than usual. "Thank you for taking care of your sister." Zara looked up from her cereal. "Your text said everything might change." "What does that mean?" Nia sank into the chair across from her daughter, exhaustion and exhilaration warring in her chest. "How did you explain to an 8-year-old that the invisible could suddenly become visible, that the future you'd stopped letting yourself imagine might actually be possible? Remember how I told you about college? How I had to stop going when Grandma got sick?" Both kids nodded. They knew the story, simplified, sanitized, stripped of the grief that still lived in Nia's bones. "Well, I might get to finish. Go back to school, get my degree, do the work I was studying for." The words felt fragile, like speaking them too confidently might shatter the possibility. "Someone at the hospital wants to help make that happen." "But you already have a job," Marcus said, confusion wrinkling his forehead. "At the hospital. A different job. One where I'd use my brain differently, help people in a different way." Nia reached across the table, took Zara's small hand. "It would mean things change for us. Different schedules, different routines, but also different opportunities. Better ones." "Would we have to move?" Zara's voice went small, worried. "No, sweetheart. We'd stay right here. But maybe." Nia let herself dream out loud. "Maybe eventually we could move somewhere with more space. Somewhere you don't have to share a room. Somewhere with a yard." Marcus abandoned the ruined eggs, pulled up the 4th chair, the one that wobbled, and sat down. At 11, he was already developing that careful way of looking at the world that came from growing up too aware of money, of limits, of his mother's exhaustion. "What happened at work, Mom? For real?" So Nia told them. Not everything. They didn't need to know about poison, about death, about the ugly calculations of greed, but she told them about noticing something the doctors missed, about speaking up when it would have been easier to stay quiet, about being right when everyone expected her to be wrong. You saved someone's life? Zara's eyes went wide. Like a superhero? Not a superhero, just someone who paid attention. Nia squeezed her daughter's hand. Sometimes that's enough. She got 3 hours of sleep before her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her thumb the green button. Ms. Carrington, this is Amanda Torch, Mr. Vale's executive assistant. The voice was crisp, professional, carrying the particular tone of someone used to getting what they wanted. Mr. Vale regained consciousness 2 hours ago. He's asking to see you. Nia sat up, sleep vanishing. He's awake? And improving remarkably, thanks to you. Would you be available to visit this afternoon, around 2 o'clock? Yes, I can be there. Excellent. I'll arrange for parking validation and visitor clearance. Oh, and Ms. Carrington, Mr. Vale wanted me to tell you he's sorry. Sorry? For what? He said you'd understand. The line went dead. Nia stood in her closet, really a corner of the bedroom with a tension rod, staring at clothes that suddenly felt inadequate. What did you wear to meet a billionaire who you'd saved from murder? Her work uniform felt wrong. Her church dress felt too formal. Everything else was old, faded, marked by years of stretching every dollar. She settled on dark jeans and a plain white blouse, her best shoes that only hurt a little. In the bathroom mirror, she studied her reflection. When had the lines around her eyes gotten so deep? When had gray started threading through her hair? When had she started disappearing into her own invisibility? Meridian looked different in daylight. The glass and chrome gleamed, the landscaping perfectly manicured, the people flowing through the entrance dressed in expensive casual wear or pristine scrubs. Nia gave her name at the desk, was handed a visitor badge that felt like a passport to foreign territory. Suite 1847 had been transformed. The medical equipment remained, but someone had opened the curtains, filled vases with fresh flowers, restored the illusion of luxury rather than crisis. And in the bed, propped up on pillows, Graham Vale looked almost human again. Not healthy, recovery would take time, but alive, alert. His eyes tracked her as she entered, and something in them made Nia's breath catch. Gratitude, yes, but also shame. Ms. Carrington, his voice came out rough, damaged by the breathing tube they'd only removed that morning. Amanda said you'd come. I wasn't sure you would. Your assistant said you wanted to see me. I wanted to apologize. Graham gestured weakly toward a chair. Please, sit. Standing while I'm horizontal feels too much like a power imbalance, and we've had enough of those. Nia sat, perched on the edge of the chair, her visitor badge feeling heavy against her chest. I've been lying here since I woke up, thinking about the last 3 weeks, Graham continued, about how many times you must have come into this room. How many times you were in the same space while doctors discussed my case, ran their tests, made their pronouncements. How many times you were right here, and I never once saw you. That's normal, Nia said quietly. People don't see the cleaning staff. We're trained to be invisible. That's not normal. That's shameful. Graham's jaw tightened. Dr. Reeves told me everything. How you identified the symptoms, how you were dismissed, mocked, told to stay in your lane, how you spoke up anyway even when it could have cost you your job. You saved my life, and I never even knew your name. You were unconscious. Before that, in my whole life. He met her eyes. I've built my career on noticing things other people miss. Patterns, opportunities, innovations hiding in plain sight. But I never noticed the people making my world function. The invisible labor that keeps everything running. You were right there, and I was blind. Nia didn't know what to say. The apology felt too big, too raw, too much like standing on ground that might shift without warning. Dr. Reeves mentioned something about helping me return to school, she said instead. Was that your idea? It was hers. I just said yes immediately and told her to make it as comprehensive as possible. Graham shifted against the pillows, wincing. You're 3 semesters short of a chemistry degree. Toxicology focus. Whitmore's program, which apparently produces students who can diagnose what $500,000 in specialists miss. I got lucky. I recognized a pattern from a class I took years ago. You got smart and observant and brave enough to speak when silence would have been safer. Graham reached for a tablet on his nightstand, fumbled with it briefly. I've spent the morning learning about you, Ms. Carrington. I hope that's not too invasive, but when someone saves your life, curiosity feels justified. Nia's stomach tightened. What did you learn? That you maintained a 3.9 GPA while working 2 part-time jobs. That you were on track for graduate school recommendations before your mother's stroke forced you to withdraw. That you've been supporting your family on a housekeeper's salary for 3 years while your kids excel in school, and you somehow managed to keep everything together. He set the tablet down. I also learned that you've been passed over for 3 supervisory positions at Meridian despite having more experience than the people they hired. Want to guess what those people had that you didn't? Nia didn't need to guess. She'd seen it herself. Degrees, credentials, the right kind of history on their resumes. The right kind of visibility, Graham corrected. The social capital that comes from looking like what people expect competence to look like. You were invisible, so they never saw your competence at all. Mr. Vale? Graham, please. Mr. Vale is what people call me when they want something or they're trying to sue me. You're the person who saved my life. First names feel appropriate. Graham. The name felt strange in her mouth. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I can't accept charity. I have kids, responsibilities. I can't just... This isn't charity. His voice hardened, suddenly carrying the edge that had built empires. This is investment. You have expertise, intelligence, observational skills that literal world-class specialists missed. That's not charity territory. That's talent that should never have been sidelined in the first place. Amanda appeared in the doorway, her arrival so smooth it seemed choreographed. I'm sorry to interrupt, but Dr. Reeves is here for the scheduled consultation. Give us 5 more minutes, Graham said. You have the detective at 3, the federal agents at 4, and your lawyers at 5. Your schedule is being rearranged to accommodate the person who prevented my murder. 5 minutes, Amanda. She disappeared, and Nia caught the faintest smile on her face as she went. Graham turned back to Nia, his expression softer. I know you need time to think, to talk with your kids, figure out logistics, decide if this is really what you want. But I need you to understand something. Calvin Price was my friend, or I thought he was. We'd known each other for 15 years. I trusted him enough to let him into my sick room, to accept his care, to never question the gifts he brought. His hand moved to where the IV line entered his arm, fingers tracing the bandage. Money made him do it. The restructuring I was planning would have cost him about $40 million in share value. So he decided I was worth less alive than dead, and he was patient about it. Methodical. He researched, planned, executed, and he almost won because nobody was looking at the obvious. Nobody except you. I was in the right place at the right time. You were in the wrong place according to every social hierarchy that exists in this building. You were exactly where you weren't supposed to matter, and you mattered anyway. Graham's voice dropped. That's not luck, Nia. That's character. And character is the one thing money can't buy, credentials can't certify, and positions can't create. You have it. You've always had it. I just want to help make sure the world gets to benefit from it properly. The silence that followed felt different than the one she'd experienced in this room before. Not dismissive, not uncomfortable. Just space for truth to settle. What would it look like? Nia asked finally. Practically? However you need it to look. Full tuition, fees, books for your final 3 semesters. Childcare support. I'm thinking a nanny. Someone qualified who can pick up your kids from school, help with homework. Be there when your class schedule conflicts with their needs. A stipend for living expenses, so you're not working 2 jobs while trying to complete a demanding program. And when you graduate, he smiled, a guaranteed position in my company's research division, if you want it, or letters of recommendation strong enough to open any door you choose. Nia's throat closed. That's too much. It's too late, Graham countered. You already saved my life. The debt exists. I'm just trying to pay it in ways that actually matter. Dr. Reeves entered then, her expression all business, but her eyes warm when they landed on Nia. I see you two are getting acquainted. Good. Graham, I need to check your neuro responses and review the latest blood work. Nia, do you have a moment to stay? I'd like your input on something. My input? Nia stood, confused. On what? On whether you'd consider a different role at Meridian while you're completing your degree. Not housekeeping. Something that uses your observational skills more directly. Doctor. Reeves pulled out her tablet, pulled up a document. We're creating a new position, patient advocacy and environmental safety specialist. Someone who moves through the hospital, observes things the medical staff might miss, asks the questions we forget to ask. It would be part-time, flexible around your class schedule, and paid considerably better than your current position. You want to pay me to notice things? We want to pay you to do what you already do brilliantly, just with authority behind it. Dr. Reeves looked at Graham. His idea, my enthusiastic support. We've already cleared it with administration. The position is yours if you want it. Nia looked between them. The doctor who'd apologized, the patient she'd saved, the future they were casually reconstructing like it was simple, like going from invisible to essential was just a matter of someone finally looking. I need to talk to my kids, she said finally. This affects them too. I can't just decide their lives without… Of course, Graham's expression gentled. Take the time you need. But Nia, while you're deciding, remember something. You didn't wait for permission to save my life. You saw what needed to be done, and you did it. That same instinct? It's telling you something now. Maybe it's worth listening to. The detective arrived promptly at 3. A woman named Torres with sharp eyes and a recorder that she placed on the bedside table with deliberate care. Nia stood to leave, but Torres gestured her back down. Actually, Ms. Carrington, I'd like you to stay if you're willing. Your observations are part of the evidence chain. So Nia sat and listened as Graham walked through the timeline. Calvin's increased visits over the past month. The hand cream that appeared 3 weeks ago, presented as a gift from Calvin's trip to Italy. The way Calvin had insisted on applying it himself, making a ritual of the care, the friendship, the attention. He'd massage it into my hands, Graham said, and his voice carried a tremor that money and power couldn't hide. Talk about how stressed I looked, how I needed to take care of myself. He'd stay for hours sometimes. We'd talk about the company, about the restructuring, about his concerns over how the changes would affect early investors. Did he know you were planning to dilute his shares? Torres asked. He knew I was considering it. The company had grown beyond the original investment structure. We needed flexibility, new capital, different stakeholders. His shares would still be worth a fortune, just not the empire-building fortune he'd been counting on. Graham's hand clenched on the blanket. Apparently a $90 million payout wasn't enough when he'd been dreaming of 130. Torres made notes, her pen moving with mechanical precision. When did you start feeling symptoms? About 2 weeks ago. Fatigue first, which I attributed to stress. Then the nausea, the hair loss. My hands started trembling during video calls. I thought it was anxiety, maybe early burnout. My doctor suggested I check into Meridian for comprehensive rest and evaluation. And Calvin had access the entire time? Full access. He was on my approved visitor list. Security waved him through without question. Graham looked at Nia. He was here the night before you identified the poison, sat right where you're sitting, told me he was praying for my recovery, applied that damn cream to my hands one more time. Nia felt her skin crawl. She'd probably passed Calvin in the hallway, never knowing she was walking past a murderer. Torres turned to her. Ms. Carrington, walk me through your process. How did you identify the thallium exposure? So Nia explained again, the smell, the symptoms, the recall history, the correlation between Calvin's visits and Graham's decline. Torres recorded every word, occasionally stopping to ask for clarification, for specifics, for the kind of detail that would matter in court. You have a background in chemistry, but work as a housekeeper, Torres observed. How did that happen? Life happened, Nia said simply. My mother got sick. I had to choose between finishing my degree and keeping my family housed and fed. I chose my family. And now you're being offered a chance to go back. It wasn't a question, but Nia answered anyway. Apparently, Torres clicked off her recorder, sat back. For what it's worth, Ms. Carrington, you built a better case than most trained investigators would have. The timeline documentation, the correlation analysis, the scientific background research. If you ever get tired of chemistry, we could use someone like you in criminal investigation. I'll keep that in mind, Naya said, and tried not to think about how 24 hours ago, the most complicated decision she'd faced was which bills to pay first. The federal agents arrived at 4, and this time Naya did leave, stepping out into the hallway while they discussed the criminal case, the evidence chain, the logistics of prosecution. Amanda materialized with coffee and a quiet space where Nia could sit, and for 20 minutes she just breathed. Her phone buzzed. Marcus, texting from school. "Mom, kids at school are saying you're a hero. Is that true?" Nia stared at the message. How had word spread so fast? Then she remembered. Hospitals were gossip factories, and a housekeeper identifying poison that specialists missed was exactly the kind of story that traveled at light speed. She typed back, "Just someone who paid attention. How's your day? Different. Good different. Love you. Love you too, baby." Another text, this time from a number she didn't recognize. "This is Dr. Reeves. When you have a moment, I'd like to discuss the academic path. I have some contacts at State who might be helpful. No pressure, just options." Options. When was the last time Nia had had those? She was still sitting there, phone in hand, when an older man in an expensive suit approached. He had the look of someone who'd spent his life in boardrooms, his silver hair perfectly cut, his shoes probably worth more than Nia's monthly rent. "Ms. Carrington, I'm Robert Chen, Graham's attorney. Do you have a moment?" Nia stood, suddenly conscious of her jeans, her discount blouse, her shoes that hurt. "Is something wrong?" "On the contrary, I wanted to discuss the financial arrangements Graham proposed. Make sure you understand exactly what's being offered and that your interests are properly protected." "Protected from what?" "From unclear expectations, from obligations you don't want to accept, from any appearance of impropriety." Robert gestured to a quiet corner, and they sat. Graham is grateful, genuinely, deeply grateful. But gratitude can sometimes blur boundaries, and I want to make sure you're comfortable with everything being proposed. He pulled out a folder, opened it to reveal documents printed on heavy paper with letterhead that screamed expensive legal counsel. Here's what Graham is offering in concrete terms. Full tuition and fees for 3 semesters at State University, chemistry program. A monthly stipend of $4,000 to cover living expenses while you're in school. Professional childcare services with the provider of your choice, fully funded. Health insurance for you and your children under the company's executive plan. And upon graduation, a guaranteed interview for a senior research position in Vail Industries' new toxicology division. Nia's hands shook as she looked at the numbers. $4,000 a month. That was more than she made working full-time at Meridian. This also includes the part-time position at the hospital Dr. Reeves mentioned. 20 hours a week, $35 an hour, flexible scheduling. Health insurance would come from Vail Industries, so the hospital position is purely supplemental income if you want it. "Why would I need supplemental income if I'm getting $4,000 a month?" Nia asked. "You might not, but Dr. Reeves thought you might value the work itself. The ability to contribute, to use your skills, to maintain connections in the medical field. The offer stands whether you take the hospital position or not." Robert pulled out another document. "This is the agreement Graham is proposing. It's not a contract in the traditional sense. You're not obligated to work for Vail Industries after graduation. The interview is guaranteed, the position is not. You're free to pursue any opportunity you choose. This is simply memorializing his commitment to support your education and your family while you complete your degree." "What does he get in return?" Nia heard the suspicion in her own voice and didn't try to hide it. "Nobody gives something for nothing. He gets to live." Robert's expression was utterly serious, and he gets to feel less guilty about the fact that his blindness to talent nearly got him killed. Graham is many things, brilliant, driven, occasionally ruthless in business, but he's not cynical about debt. You saved his life. He wants to change yours. It's that simple. Nothing is that simple. You're right, so let me add the complexity. Robert leaned forward. Graham's company is worth $43 billion. Last quarter, he personally made more in passive interest than this entire commitment will cost. This is not charity, because charity implies sacrifice. Graham is sacrificing nothing. He's investing in someone who demonstrated more competence in one shift than people with six-figure salaries showed in 3 weeks. If that makes you uncomfortable, I understand. But don't reject it because you think it's too generous. By his standards, it's barely adequate compensation for saving his life. Nia looked at the documents, at the numbers that could reshape everything, at the future being offered like it was already decided. I need to read this, all of it, carefully. Of course. Take it home, review it, show it to anyone you want. If you decide to proceed, we'll set up the accounts, arrange the childcare interviews, coordinate with the university. If you decide this isn't what you want, shred the documents and we'll never mention it again. No pressure, no obligation, just an offer from someone who understands he owes you everything. Robert stood, straightened his jacket. One more thing, Ms. Carrington. Graham is going to recover because you spoke up. But there are probably other Graham Vales out there, dying from things nobody notices because the people who would notice aren't in positions to be heard. If you finish your degree, if you step into the kind of role where your expertise carries weight, how many other lives might you save? That's not pressure. That's just something to consider while you're deciding. He left, and Nia sat alone with documents that weighed almost nothing and promised everything. She made it home by 6, her head spinning, the papers burning like hot coals in her bag. Marcus and Zara were waiting, their excitement palpable even before she walked through the door. "Mom, you're famous!" Zara launched herself at Nia, wrapping small arms around her waist. "Mrs. Peterson told our whole class about you saving someone's life." "I'm not famous, baby. You were on the news," Marcus interrupted, holding up his phone. "Local station. They're calling you the guardian angel of Meridian Private Medical." Nia took the phone, watched 15 seconds of a news anchor discussing the dramatic save, the housekeeper turned hero, the story of observation triumphing over credentials. Her own face flashed on screen, a photo pulled from somewhere, probably her employee file, and she barely recognized herself. When had she started looking so tired? "So it's true." Marcus's voice carried that careful hope that broke her heart. "About going back to school? About things changing?" Nia set down her bag, pulled both kids close. "It might be true. Probably will be true if we decide it's what we want. But it's a big decision, and it affects all of us, so we need to talk about it." They sat at the kitchen table, the same one where Nia had done her own homework years ago, where her mother had taught her to balance a checkbook, where she'd cried the night she'd withdrawn from State University. And she laid out the offer, simplified for young ears but honest about the scope. "It would mean different schedules," she explained. "I'd be in class some days, studying a lot. You'd have someone else picking you up from school, helping with homework, probably someone younger, someone fun, but it wouldn't be me every afternoon anymore." "But you'd be home at night?" Zara asked, and Nia heard the worry underneath. "Most nights, yes. This wouldn't be like when I worked double shifts and you barely saw me. This would be school, which has set hours, and then time with you. Better time, because I wouldn't be exhausted from scrubbing floors." Marcus studied the document she'd spread on the table, his 11-year-old mind already doing calculations. "The money. Is it real? Like really real?" "Really real. Enough that we wouldn't have to worry about rent, about food, about whether we can afford new shoes when you grow out of the old ones." "Could we get a place with 2 bedrooms?" Zara's voice was small. "So Marcus and I don't have to share?" "Eventually, yes. Maybe even sooner than eventually." The silence that followed felt holy somehow, like standing in the presence of answered prayers nobody had dared to speak out loud. "You should do it," Marcus said finally. "You've always told us education matters, that we should study hard and aim high. You should get to do that too." "But what if it's too much? What if I can't handle school and being your mom and whoop?" "Mom." Zara's 8-year-old hand found hers. "You're already handling everything. This would just be handling better things." And there it was. Permission from the 2 people whose opinions mattered most. Trust from children who'd learned too early that life was hard and futures were fragile, but maybe, just maybe, things could change. Nia pulled them both into a hug that lasted long enough for tears to come and go, for fear and hope to war and settle, for the decision to solidify into certainty. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, we're doing this." She called Robert Chen at 8 p.m. after the kids were in bed, after she'd read every word of the documents 3 times. He answered on the second ring. "Ms. Carrington, I hoped I'd hear from you tonight. I want to accept the education support, the child care, all of it, but I have conditions." "I'm listening." "I want the hospital position, the patient advocacy role, not for the money, though that helps, but because Dr. Reeves is right. I want to keep using these skills, keep being part of that world. And I want it in writing that if I fail, if I can't handle school or I don't graduate, the money for my kids' care doesn't disappear. They don't get punished for my limitations." Done and done. Anything else? "I want to meet Calvin Price." The silence on the other end stretched long enough that Naya thought the connection had dropped. "That's an unusual request," Robert said finally. "May I ask why?" "Because I need to understand how someone can do that to a friend, how greed can override everything else. I need to see his face and know that evil isn't some abstract thing. It's just a person making terrible choices. He's in federal custody. Arrangements would have to be made, and he'd have to agree to see you. But if it's important to you, we can try." "It's important. Then we'll make it happen. I'll have the revised documents ready by Monday. Can you come to the office to sign?" "I'll be there." Nia hung up and stood at her window, looking out at the city that had been her cage and was about to become her proving ground. Somewhere out there, Graham Vale was recovering, probably reviewing business reports between medical consultations, already planning his return to the empire he'd built. Somewhere else, Calvin Price sat in a cell, contemplating the $40 million mistake that had cost him everything. And here, in a cramped apartment that smelled like burned toast in childhood, Nia Carrington stood on the edge of transformation, watching her reflection in glass turn from housework worn to something sharper, harder, more certain. Tomorrow, she'd call State University and start the readmission process. She'd meet with Dr. Reeves and learn the parameters of her new role. She'd begin interviews for childcare providers who could handle 2 smart kids who asked too many questions. But tonight, she let herself stand in the space between who she'd been and who she was becoming, feeling the weight of invisible years falling away like a skin she no longer needed. Outside her window, the city glittered with lights that had always been there, that she'd always been too tired to really see. Now she saw them clearly, each one a possibility, each one a door that might finally open for the woman who'd learned to speak when silence would have been safer. The woman who'd saved a life and in doing so reclaimed her own. The federal detention center sat like a concrete fortress on the edge of the city, its walls the color of old bruises, its windows narrow slits that seemed designed to keep hope out as much as inmates in. Nia sat in Robert Chen's Mercedes, her hands folded in her lap, watching corrections officers move through security checkpoints with the practiced indifference of people who'd seen too much humanity at its worst. "You don't have to do this," Robert said from the driver's seat. He'd insisted on accompanying her, on being present for what he called a highly irregular and potentially traumatic encounter. "Calvin Price is a man facing life in prison for attempted murder. Whatever you're hoping to find in there—" "I'm not hoping to find anything," Naya interrupted. "I'm hoping to understand. There's a difference." She'd been back at Meridian for 3 days now, wearing a different uniform, business casual instead of housekeeping scrubs, carrying a tablet instead of a mop, walking through the same corridors with a completely different authority. The patient advocacy and environmental safety specialist role had turned out to be exactly what Dr. Reeves promised: structured observation with the power to actually do something about what she noticed. On her first day, she'd identified a medication storage protocol that was creating contamination risks. On her second, she'd caught a pattern of falls in the cardiac wing that traced back to improper bed rail positioning during shift changes. On her third, she'd sat in on a case review where doctors actually asked for her input, her observations, her expertise. It felt like learning to breathe after years underwater. But at night, alone in the apartment while Marcus and Zara slept, Nia kept circling back to the same question. What kind of person decides a friend is worth less alive than dead? What calculation made $40 million worth more than 15 years of history, of trust, of shared meals and shared confidences? She needed to see Calvin Price's face when she asked him. Needed to know if evil announced itself or if it just looked like everyone else. The visitor processing took 40 minutes. Forms, metal detectors, pat-downs, explanations to skeptical guards about why a civilian wanted to see a federal prisoner awaiting trial. Robert's legal credentials smoothed most of the resistance, but Nia could feel the judgment in the officer's eyes. Why would the woman who'd caught the killer want to sit across from him? Because monsters shouldn't be abstract, she wanted to tell them. Because understanding how people become terrible might help stop the next one. The visiting room was exactly what television had taught her to expect. Gray walls, gray table, gray chairs bolted to gray floors. A camera in the corner recording everything. A guard by the door, hand resting casually near his radio. And across the table, wearing an orange jumpsuit that made his expensive tan look sickly, Calvin Price. He'd been handsome once, probably still was, by conventional standards. Early 40s, with the kind of carefully maintained appearance that came from personal trainers and dermatologists, and the assumption that looking good was a professional requirement. But prison had already started eroding the polish. His hair needed cutting. His nails, which had probably seen regular manicures, were ragged. And his eyes? Those were what stopped Nia cold. They were afraid. "Ms. Carrington," Calvin's voice came out hoarse, uncertain. "I wasn't sure you'd actually come. I wasn't sure you'd agree to see me. My lawyer advised against it. Said anything I say to you could be used against me, but—" He gestured at the walls, the guard, the reality of his situation. "I don't think my situation can get much worse, and I owed you a conversation." "You don't owe me anything," Nia said, sitting across from him. "I'm not here for apologies." "Then why are you here?" Good question. Nia folded her hands on the table, studying the man who'd decided Graham Vale was worth killing. Up close, he looked ordinary. Not evil. Not monstrous. Just tired and scared and human in ways that made the whole thing worse. "I want to understand how someone does what you did. How you looked at a friend you'd known for 15 years, and decided the money was worth more." Calvin flinched. "It wasn't about the money. Not really. Or not just the money." "Then what was it about?" He was quiet for so long that Nia thought he might not answer. The guard shifted by the door. The camera hummed. And finally, Calvin spoke. "Do you know what it's like to be the almost guy?" His voice was bitter, self-aware in a way that suggested he'd had a lot of time to think. "The one who was there at the beginning, who believed in the dream, who invested everything when nobody else would. Graham built Vale Industries in his dorm room. I wrote the first check from my trust fund, $20,000, which was all I had. I believed in him when investors laughed, when professors said he was wasting his potential, when his own parents told him to get a real job." "So you were an early believer. That doesn't justify—" "I'm not justifying. I'm explaining." Calvin's hands clenched on the table. 20,000 became 2 million, then 20 million. Then 200 million. Forbes started calling me a genius investor. My family finally looked at me like I'd done something right. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the disappointment, the trust fund kid who'd never earned anything. I was the guy who'd seen the future and bet on it. Nia waited, letting him talk, watching his face shift between shame and defensiveness. Then Graham started talking about restructuring. About bringing in new investors, diluting the original shares, changing the cap table to reflect the company's new direction. He showed me spreadsheets, projections, explanations about market positioning and growth potential. Very rational, very smart. And at the bottom of all those numbers was my stake going from $130 million to 90. $90 million, Nia said quietly. Most people would call that winning. Most people didn't spend 15 years being defined by their relationship to Graham Vale's success. Most people didn't field calls from their father asking if they'd finally done something valuable or just gotten lucky. Most people didn't wake up every morning knowing that everything they had was because of someone else's genius, someone else's work, someone else's vision. Calvin's voice cracked, and Nia saw the truth under the justifications. This wasn't about money. This was about identity. About self-worth measured in shares and valuations, about a man who'd confused being adjacent to greatness with being great himself. "I started researching," he continued, "just curiosity at first. What would happen if Graham wasn't around to push the restructuring? The shares would stay intact. The original investors would maintain their positions. I'd still be the genius who'd backed the boy wonder, not the guy who got squeezed out when things got serious. When did research become action? I don't know. That's the truth. I genuinely don't know when the thought experiment became a plan, when the plan became preparation, when preparation became... He stopped, swallowed hard. The thallium was easy to get. Rat poison, basically, if you know where to look. The cream was genius because Graham had sensitive skin, always used luxury products, trusted gifts from friends. I contaminated a batch, made sure the concentration was low enough to be gradual, high enough to be effective. Effective. Nia let the word hang in the air. You mean lethal. I mean successful at solving my problem. That's how I thought about it. Not murder, just problem solving, protecting my interests, maintaining my position. Calvin looked at her directly for the first time. Do you know what the sickest part is? I sat with him, held his hand, told him I was praying for his recovery while I was literally applying more poison, and I felt terrible about it, genuinely terrible. I cried in my car after every visit. But you kept visiting. Because stopping would have looked suspicious, because I'd already committed, because... His voice dropped to almost a whisper. Because I'd convinced myself it was necessary. That this was just business, just self-preservation, just what you had to do in a world where only the ruthless survived. Nia thought about Graham lying in that hospital bed, his body betraying him while specialists scrambled and failed. About the smells she'd noticed, the symptoms she'd cataloged, the courage it had taken to speak up when everyone expected her to stay silent. You almost won, she said. If I hadn't noticed, if the doctors hadn't listened, Graham would be dead and you'd be $40 million richer. You'd have gotten away with it. Would I? Calvin's laugh was hollow. You think I could have lived with it? Looked at myself in the mirror, attended the funeral, given the eulogy about my dear friend while knowing I'd killed him? The money would have been poisoned too, Ms. Carrington. Maybe slower than thallium, maybe quieter, but just as deadly to whatever was left of my soul. Then why did you do it? Because I'm weak. The admission came out flat, certain. Because when the choice came between my ego and my friend's life, I chose ego. Because I'd spent so long telling myself I mattered, I was important, I deserved the success that I couldn't accept being reminded that it was never really mine. It was always Graham's. I was just along for the ride. The silence that followed felt like church, like confession, like the moment before absolution or damnation. Nia sat with it, with this man's unvarnished truth, with the ordinariness of evil when you stripped away the mythology. Do you know what I've learned here? Calvin gestured at the gray walls. 3 weeks in federal detention, facing life in prison, and I've finally figured out who I actually am. Not Graham Vale's friend, not a genius investor, not a master strategist, just a scared, insecure man who confused net worth with self-worth and made the worst decision of his life because he couldn't face being ordinary. You're not ordinary, Nia said. Ordinary people don't poison their friends. They just live with disappointment like everyone else. Is that supposed to make me feel better or worse? It's supposed to be true. Nia stood, the visit feeling complete in ways she couldn't articulate. Thank you for talking to me. Wait. Calvin stood too, the guard tensing slightly. Can I ask you something? Why did you speak up? You could have stayed quiet, let the doctors figure it out or not, kept your job and your invisibility and your safety. Why risk everything for someone you didn't even know? Nia considered the question, this man who'd chosen money over morality, asking why she'd chosen the opposite. Because I knew, she said simply. Once I understood what was happening, staying silent would have made me complicit. And I've spent 3 years being invisible, being dismissed, being treated like I don't matter. But I've never been someone who could watch someone die when I had the power to stop it. That's not invisibility, that's just cowardice dressed up as self-preservation. She moved toward the door, then turned back one more time. The difference between us, Mr. Price? You had everything, and it still wasn't enough. I had nothing, and it was still too much to lose if it meant compromising who I am. Money didn't make that choice. Character did. You just didn't have enough of the one that mattered. The drive back to the city was quiet. Robert didn't push her to talk, just let her sit with whatever she'd found in that gray room. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle. Did you get what you came for? I got something. I'm not sure it's what I expected. Nia watched the city approach through the windshield, buildings rising like promises against the afternoon sky. He's not a monster. That's what makes it terrifying. He's just a person who made terrible choices for comprehensible reasons. And if he can do that, anyone can. Most people don't, though. That's worth remembering. Is it? How many people are one bad quarter away from deciding ethics are optional? How many would choose 40 million over integrity if they thought they could get away with it? Fewer than you think, Robert said. And you're proof of that. You had every reason to stay silent, every incentive to protect yourself. And you spoke anyway. They pulled up to Meridian's main entrance, where Nia's shift started in 20 minutes. She gathered her bag, her tablet, her new identity as someone whose voice carried weight. "Thank you for taking me," she said. "I know it was irregular. It was necessary, for you, anyway. And sometimes necessary matters more than regular." Robert handed her a business card. "This is my direct line. Not for Graham, not for the foundation. For you. If you need legal advice, if you have questions about the agreements, if someone gives you trouble about any of this, you call me." "Understood." Nia took the card, added it to the collection of impossible things that had become her life. "Understood." Inside Meridian, the afternoon shift was in full swing. Doctors on rounds, nurses checking vitals, patients recovering or declining according to the mysterious calculus of medicine and chance. Nia moved through it all with her tablet, her observations, her questions that were now welcomed instead of dismissed. Dr. Reeves found her on the third floor reviewing a patient chart that had raised flags in the system. "Nia, how was your visit?" Word traveled fast in this place. Nia had learned that visibility came with scrutiny, with everyone suddenly interested in the housekeeper-turned-specialist who'd caught a killer. Illuminating, depressing, human. Nia closed the chart, made a note on her tablet. "This patient in 3242, the post-surgical infection rates in his case don't match the protocol documentation. Someone's cutting corners on sterilization." Dr. Reeves pulled up the chart, scanned it with the speed of long practice. "You're right. I'll flag it for review. How did you catch this?" "Same way I caught everything else. Patterns, numbers that don't add up, details that everyone else is too busy to notice." Nia met her eyes. "Speaking of which, I need to talk to you about something." They found an empty consultation room, the kind with windows that overlooked the city and furniture that cost more than most people's cars. Dr. Reeves sat across from her, professional but warm, the woman who'd apologized and then acted on that apology. "I've been thinking about the toxicology division," Nia began. "The one Graham's creating at Vale Industries, the position I'd interview for after graduation." "Having second thoughts?" "Having first thoughts, really. Actual detailed thoughts about what that work would look like." Nia pulled up her tablet, showed Dr. Reeves the notes she'd been compiling. What if it wasn't just corporate work? What if there was a public health component, a way to use those resources to help people who can't afford private hospitals and personal physicians? Dr. Reeves leaned forward, interest sharpening her expression. "What are you proposing?" "A program that partners with community clinics, emergency rooms, public hospitals. Training for medical staff on recognizing unusual poisoning, environmental toxins, the kind of slow-moving threats that don't show up on standard diagnostics. A hotline for consults, maybe, where doctors dealing with mysterious cases could reach out to experts." Nia felt her passion building, ideas that had been percolating since the Calvin Price conversation. How many people die because nobody's looking at the right things? How many cases get written off as mysterious illness when someone with the right knowledge could identify the real cause? "You're talking about democratizing expertise. I'm talking about making invisible threats visible, and making sure the people who can identify them aren't invisible either." Nia thought about housekeeping uniforms, about being ignored in hallways, about knowledge that went unheard because it came from the wrong person. "The only reason I could save Graham was because I was in the room. But I was in the room by accident, by luck, by being in a position nobody takes seriously. What about all the other rooms I'm not in? All the other people who are dying while knowledge walks past them pushing a cleaning cart?" Dr. Reeves was quiet for a long moment. Her fingers steepled in that way Nia had learned meant she was processing, calculating, strategizing. You'd need funding, infrastructure, partnerships with medical organizations, protocols for consultation, liability protection, quality control. She smiled. And you'd need to finish your degree first. Learn the science formally so your expertise can't be dismissed or questioned. I know. I'm not proposing this for tomorrow. I'm proposing it for 3 years from now, when I have the credentials and the platform and the relationships to make it happen. Nia's hands were shaking slightly, adrenaline and hope mixing in her bloodstream. But I wanted to tell you now, get your input, see if I'm crazy or if this could actually work. You're not crazy. Ambitious, maybe. Optimistic about bureaucratic barriers, definitely. But not crazy. Dr. Reeves pulled out her own tablet, started making notes. I'll talk to Graham when he's further along in recovery. Present this as a potential direction for the toxicology division. He's been looking for ways to make the company's research more socially impactful anyway. This could be perfect. Really? Really. You saved his life, Nia. But more than that, you showed him what's possible when we actually pay attention to the people we've been trained to ignore. That's a lesson he won't forget. And now you're proposing to build a system that prevents others from making the same mistake. Of course he'll support it. Nia left the meeting feeling lighter, purposeful, like the future was something she could actually shape instead of something that just happened to her. She finished her shift, identifying 2 more protocol violations, flagging a medication interaction that could have been serious, and having a conversation with the patient's family about environmental factors that might be affecting recovery. At 7 p.m., she clocked out and drove to pick up Marcus and Zara from the after-school program they'd been attending while Nia navigated her new schedule. The director, Mrs. Patterson, met her at the door with a smile that had become familiar. Your kids are remarkable, you know that? Marcus helped 3 younger students with their math homework today. Zara organized an entire art project for the kindergartners. They're natural leaders. They're natural survivors, Nia corrected gently. They've had to be. Well, they won't have to survive alone anymore. Not with what you're building for them. Mrs. Patterson squeezed Nia's arm. It's inspiring, watching you fight for your future. A lot of parents tell their kids education matters. You're showing them. In the car, Marcus and Zara chattered about their day, about homework and friends, and the permission slip for a field trip that Nia could actually afford to sign now. Normal things. Ordinary things. The kind of concerns that had felt like luxuries when every dollar was spoken for and every decision carried weight. Mom? Zara's voice cut through the comfortable noise. Are you happy? The question landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading outward. Nia glanced in the rearview mirror, met her daughter's serious eyes. What makes you ask that, baby? You smile different now, like you mean it. Before you smiled like you were supposed to. Now it looks real. Out of the mouths of 8-year-olds. Nia felt tears prick her eyes, blinked them back. Yeah, sweetheart. I think I am happy. Or getting there, anyway. Good, Zara said, satisfied. You deserve it. They deserved it, too. All of them deserved this chance, this shift, this transformation from surviving to actually living. Nia drove through evening traffic, past the neighborhoods where she'd worked double shifts, past the grocery store where she'd counted pennies, past all the landmarks of the life she was leaving behind. At home, she made dinner while the kids did homework. Simple stuff. Pasta and sauce, garlic bread, salad from a bag. But they ate together at the table, talking and laughing, and nobody worried about whether there'd be food tomorrow or if the rent check would clear. After dinner, after dishes, after Marcus and Zara were settled in bed with their books and their nightlights, Nia sat at the kitchen table with her laptop and pulled up the State University admissions portal. The readmission application stared back at her, waiting to be completed. Name, address, previous enrollment dates, reason for withdrawal, reason for return. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. How did you explain in a form field that life had gotten in the way? That duty had overridden dreams? That 3 years of being invisible had taught her exactly how valuable visibility was? She started typing. I withdrew in 2015 to care for my mother and support my family. I am returning because I have been given a second chance to complete what I started, and because I now understand that expertise without credentials is like having a voice without an audience. I want the degree that will make people listen, Not because I need validation, but because the world needs people who can identify threats that others miss. And I've learned I'm good at that. It's time to make it official. She hit submit before doubt could creep in, before the old voices about knowing your place and staying in your lane could drown out the new one that said she belonged here, deserved this, had earned the right to walk back through doors that had closed years ago. The confirmation email arrived 3 minutes later. Application received. Review in progress. Expect response within 2 weeks. 2 weeks. 14 days between this moment and finding out if the universe agreed she deserved a second chance. Nia closed the laptop, walked to the window, looked out at the city that had been her prison and her proving ground. Somewhere out there, Graham Vale was recovering, probably back to reviewing reports and making decisions worth billions. Calvin Price was sitting in a cell, contemplating the price of ego. Dr. Reeves was planning programs and protocols that would incorporate the lessons learned from one housekeeper's observation. And here, in this small apartment that smelled like garlic bread and childhood, Nia Carrington stood at the window and let herself imagine walking across a stage in 3 years, wearing a cap and gown, holding a degree that said her knowledge was legitimate, her expertise was real, her voice had earned the right to be heard. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost ignored it, then saw the preview of the message. "This is Graham. Got your number from Robert. Hope that's okay. Want to thank you properly. Dinner when I'm discharged. Bring your kids. I owe them a thank you too for sharing you." Nia smiled, typed back, "Dinner sounds good, but you don't owe me anything. I did what anyone should have done." His response came immediately. "But you're the one who actually did it. That's worth more than you know. Thank you for everything." She set the phone down, feeling the weight of his gratitude, the responsibility of having saved someone's life, and therefore being forever linked to whatever that life accomplished. Graham would recover, rebuild, probably make another $1 billion, and fund another dozen innovations. And somewhere in all of that, he'd carry the knowledge that a housekeeper had seen what specialists missed, that invisible could become essential, that hierarchy was a lie told by people who benefited from others staying small. Nia checked on her kids one more time, Marcus asleep with his space book, Zara curled up with her elephant, and felt gratitude so fierce it hurt. They were safe, fed, dreaming about futures that didn't include poverty and limits and all the ways the world told them they didn't matter. She brushed her teeth, changed into pajamas, climbed into bed with her own book, a chemistry text she'd checked out from the library, reviewing concepts she'd learned years ago and would need to remember. The equations and formulas felt like coming home, like speaking a language she'd been forced to forget. Tomorrow she'd go back to Meridian, back to identifying risks and asking questions and occupying space with authority. Next week she'd start interviews for childcare providers, looking for someone who could handle Marcus's curiosity and Zara's energy. In 2 weeks she'd hopefully get the email saying she'd been readmitted to state. But tonight she just read chemistry and remembered why she'd loved it, why she'd been good at it, why walking away had felt like amputating part of herself. The science was beautiful in its precision, its predictability, its ability to explain the invisible forces that shape the visible world. Kind of like her life right now. Invisible forces, knowledge, courage, observation, reshaping everything visible in ways that felt like chemistry in reverse. Not breaking down compounds, but building them up. Creating something new from elements that had always been there. Just waiting for the right catalyst, the right moment, the right person willing to speak up when silence would have been safer. Nia fell asleep with the textbook open on her chest, formulas dancing behind her eyelids, and for the first time in 3 years, her dreams weren't about survival. They were about possibility, about a future where invisible people became impossible to ignore, where knowledge got the platform it deserved, where one woman's courage to speak up became a system that made sure others would be heard. The chemistry was just beginning. The acceptance email arrived on a Tuesday morning while Nia was reviewing infection control protocols in Meridian's surgery wing. Her phone buzzed, the notification appearing like a whisper of possibility, and when she saw state university admissions in the subject line, her heart stopped for 3 full seconds before remembering to beat again. She found an empty stairwell, hands shaking as she opened the message. The words blurred, then sharpened, then seemed to glow with their own light. "We are pleased to inform you of your readmission to State University's chemistry program, effective spring semester. Your previous credits remain valid. Welcome back, Miss Carrington. Welcome back. Like she'd just been on vacation instead of exile. Like 3 years of scrubbing floors and swallowing dreams was just an intermission before the main act resumed. Nia sat on the stairs and cried, big, ugly tears that she didn't try to hide from the nurse who found her there, who took one look at her face and said, "Good news or bad news?" and then hugged her tight when Nia managed to choke out, "Good, really, really good." She called Marcus first, then Zara, pulling them out of class to share news that couldn't wait for school dismissal. Their excitement traveled through the phone like electricity, Marcus yelling loud enough that his teacher probably heard, Zara asking if this meant they could celebrate with ice cream, both of them understanding in their own ways that everything had just shifted permanently toward better. Then she called Dr. Reeves, who abandoned her patient rounds to find Nia in the stairwell, who sat beside her on those concrete steps and said, "I knew they'd take you back. The only question was whether it would take them 2 weeks or 2 days to recognize what an asset you'd be." "Spring semester starts in 6 weeks, Nia said, still staring at the email like it might vanish if she looked away. 6 weeks to figure out childcare, adjust my schedule here, remember how to be a student instead of just someone who works." "You've always been a student. You just weren't in a classroom." Dr. Reeves squeezed her shoulder. "And you won't be doing this alone. Graham's back in the office part-time now. He's been asking about you, about when you'd hear from the university. He has something planned, I think, something he's been working on since he got out of the ICU." The dinner Graham had mentioned happened that Friday at a restaurant Nia had only seen from the outside, the kind of place with valet parking and a wine list that probably cost more than her monthly grocery budget. She arrived with Marcus and Zara in their best clothes, church outfits that suddenly seemed shabby against the restaurant's elegant interior, and felt that old familiar sensation of not belonging, of being visible in all the wrong ways. Then Graham appeared, still moving carefully, but looking remarkably alive for someone who'd been dying 4 weeks ago. His handshake was warm, genuine, and when he crouched down to Marcus and Zara's level to introduce himself, Nia felt some of her nervousness ease. "You must be the reason your mom is so brilliant," he said to Marcus. "She told me you help your sister with homework, take care of things when she's working. That's impressive for 11. Marcus blushed, pleased and embarrassed. "Mom does the hard stuff. I just help." "The hard stuff is often the helping," Graham said. "Remember that." He turned to Zara. "And you're the artist, right? Your mom showed me the picture you drew of your family. You made her look happy. That's a gift." "She is happy now," Zara said with 8-year-old certainty. "Because you let her go back to school." "I'm not letting her do anything. She earned this herself." Graham stood, met Nia's eyes. "I'm just making sure the barriers that shouldn't exist don't stop her." Dinner was surreal. They ate food Nia couldn't pronounce, sat in chairs that were probably worth more than her car, and talked about everything except the poison that had brought them together. Graham asked Marcus about his favorite subjects, Zara about her art, and listened to their answers with the same focused attention that had probably built his empire. Over dessert, something chocolate and architectural that made Zara's eyes go wide, Graham pulled out a folder. "I wanted to wait until you heard from the university," he said, sliding it across the table to Nia. "But now that it's official, we can make this official too." Inside were documents, detailed and professional, outlining something called the Carrington Fellowship Program. Nia scanned the first page, then the second, her confusion growing with each paragraph. "I don't understand. This isn't just funding for me. This is a scholarship program for adults returning to complete interrupted STEM degrees, full funding, childcare support, living stipends, the works." Graham leaned back, looking satisfied. "You're the inaugural recipient, but you won't be the last. I'm endowing it with $50 million. Should fund about 100 students a year, give or take." The number was so large it didn't compute. Nia looked at Dr. Reeves, who was smiling like she'd known about this all along. $50 million, Nia repeated. "Because I identified thallium poisoning? Because you showed me that talent doesn't disappear just because life gets in the way. Because there are probably thousands of people like you, brilliant, capable, forced to choose between education and survival, and they deserve a second chance." Graham's expression grew serious. "I built a company worth $40 billion, Nia. I can afford $50 million to make sure other people get to build their own futures. And honestly, it's the best investment I'll ever make. Marcus was doing math in his head. Nia could see it in his face. That's enough for 100 people? Every year? Every year in perpetuity, the endowment generates returns that fund the program indefinitely. Graham looked at Marcus with respect. You're quick with numbers. That'll serve you well. I want to be an aerospace engineer, Marcus said. The dream he'd only spoken aloud to Nia now offered to a billionaire like it was reasonable, possible, real. Then you should be. And when the time comes, if you need support, this program will be here. Your mom's making sure of that. Nia's throat closed. She looked at her kids, at this man she'd saved who was now saving dozens of others, at the future unfolding like a map where all the roads led somewhere better. I don't know what to say. Say you'll help me administer it. Not now, not while you're in school, but after you graduate, when you're running the toxicology division's public health program. Graham smiled at her surprise. Yes, Dr. Reeves told me about your proposal. It's brilliant, and we're funding that too. But while you're building that, I want you on the fellowship selection committee. You know what it's like to have your education interrupted. You know what questions to ask, what support people actually need. Help me make sure we're choosing the right candidates and giving them the right resources. You're asking me to help run a $50 million program. I'm asking you to use your expertise where it matters most. You saved my life by noticing what others missed. Now help me notice the talent that everyone else is overlooking. The drive home was quiet, all three of them processing the evening in their own ways. When they pulled into their apartment complex, Marcus spoke first. Mom, are we rich now? Nia laughed, surprised. No, baby, we're supported. There's a difference. What's the difference? Rich is when you have money. Supported is when you have what you need to build something meaningful. We're supported. What we do with that support determines everything else. She got them ready for bed, listening to their excited chatter about the restaurant, the food, the man who'd endowed a program in her name. When they were finally settled, she sat at the kitchen table with the fellowship documents, reading through the details with growing astonishment. The Carrington Fellowship Program. Her name on something that would outlive her, that would help people she'd never meet, that would turn her moment of courage into a system of second chances. It felt too big, too important, too much like legacy when she was just trying to get her own degree. Her phone rang. Graham's number. Did I overwhelm you? He asked without preamble. Robert said I might have gone too big too fast. You endowed a $50 million scholarship program in my name. Yeah, that's overwhelming. Want me to scale it back? No. The word came out fierce. No, it's perfect. It's just, I saved your life. That was one action, one moment. This is going to change hundreds of lives every year. The scale feels disproportionate. The scale feels exactly right, Graham countered. You saved one life, yes. But by speaking up when you had every reason to stay silent, you demonstrated something crucial, that expertise exists in unexpected places, that talent doesn't always announce itself in credentialed ways, that paying attention to the invisible people is not just moral, it's practical. That lesson is worth $50 million. Honestly, it's worth more. Nia was quiet, letting his words settle. There's something else, Graham continued. Something I haven't told anyone yet, except my therapist. And yes, nearly dying convinced me I needed therapy. Calvin's arrest, the publicity, everything that came after. It forced me to examine how I've moved through the world, how I've built systems that benefited people like me while ignoring people like you. Not out of malice, but out of blindness. Comfortable, convenient blindness. You're being pretty hard on yourself. I'm being honest. And the honest truth is that I've spent 20 years building a company that changed technology but reinforced existing hierarchies. We hired the best people, we said. We found top talent. But we only looked in places where people like us looked. We only recognized credentials that people with privilege could afford to earn. We missed people like you because we designed our systems to miss people like you. His voice carried a weight that Nia recognized, the burden of understanding you'd been part of the problem, even unintentionally. The fellowship is my attempt to fix that, but it's bigger than money. I'm restructuring how Vail Industries recruits, evaluates, hires. We're creating pathways for people with non-traditional backgrounds, skills-based hiring instead of degree checking, partnerships with community colleges and technical programs. We're making sure that the next Nia Carrington doesn't have to wait 3 years and nearly let someone die before anyone notices her. That's a lot of change for one poisoning to inspire. It's a lot of change that should have happened anyway. You just made it impossible to ignore. Graham paused. I'm going to be testifying at Calvin's trial in a few months. The prosecutors want me to talk about the friendship, the betrayal, the emotional impact. But I want to talk about what his attempt to kill me revealed, about how close I came to dying, not just from poison, but from my own assumptions about who matters and who doesn't. They might not let you make it political. It's not political, it's personal. Calvin tried to kill me because he couldn't handle being less important than he wanted to be. And I nearly died because I couldn't see the person who was actually important, the one who could save me. Those two things are connected. Ego, hierarchy, the assumption that value correlates with visibility. It almost killed me literally. It's been killing our society figuratively for generations. Nia felt the truth of that in her bones. In the 3 years she'd spent being invisible, in every dismissive glance and interrupted sentence and assumption that her uniform defined her capabilities. When you testify, tell them that, she said. Tell them that poison comes in many forms. Some of it is thallium in hand cream. Some of it is systems that waste human potential because we're too blind to see it. Will you come? To the trial? The question surprised her. Why would I need to be there? Because the prosecutors want you to testify too. About identifying the poisoning, about being dismissed by the medical staff, about speaking up anyway. They think your testimony will be powerful. Will you consider it? Nia thought about standing in a courtroom, facing Calvin Price again, making her observations matter in a legal context where they couldn't be ignored or dismissed. I'll consider it, she said, but I need to focus on school first. Spring semester starts in January. Between now and then, I have to remember how to be a student, figure out childcare, adjust my work schedule here. The trial can wait. Fair enough. The offer stands whenever you're ready. They hung up, and Nia sat in the quiet apartment, feeling the weight of everything that had changed and everything that was still changing. 6 weeks until classes started. 6 weeks to transform from housekeeper turned specialist into student turned professional. 6 weeks to prepare for a future that had seemed impossible a month ago. She pulled up the university's course catalog, started mapping out her path to graduation. 3 semesters: advanced organic chemistry, analytical methods, toxicology specialization courses, a senior research project. The workload would be intense, especially while maintaining part-time hours at Meridian, but Nia felt ready for intense. Ready to prove she belonged, to earn the credentials that would make her expertise undeniable. The childcare interviews started the following week. Nia met with 7 candidates, all qualified, all experienced, all perfectly fine. But it was the 8th candidate who made Marcus and Zara light up, who asked them about their interests before discussing logistics with Nia, who understood instinctively that childcare wasn't just supervision, it was partnership. Her name was Diana, a recent education graduate with a background in youth development and a warmth that reminded Nia of her own mother before the stroke. She sat at their kitchen table and talked with Marcus about space exploration, helped Zara with an art project, and told Nia honestly that she'd never been a nanny before but believed in kids and growth and meeting people where they were. "Why this job?" Nia asked. "You could teach, work in programs with more prestige." "Prestige doesn't interest me. Impact does." Diana looked at Marcus and Zara, who were showing her their room, their books, their carefully guarded treasures. "Your kids are brilliant. Anyone can see that. But they're also carrying weight, the weight of watching their mom struggle, of growing up too aware of money and limits. I want to be the person who helps lighten that load, who makes coming home from school feel safe and fun instead of just another responsibility." Nia hired her on the spot. Terms negotiated with the budget Graham's foundation provided. Start date coordinated with the spring semester. Diana would pick up the kids from school, help with homework, provide dinner on nights when Nia had late classes or study groups. She'd be consistency, support, the safety net that let Nia focus on school without constant worry. Christmas came and went, modest but joyful, marked by gifts they could actually afford, and a dinner that didn't require calculating every ingredient's cost. Nia bought Marcus the space encyclopedia he'd been eyeing, got Zara a real art set with quality supplies, and for herself, allowed the indulgence of new clothes for classes. Nothing fancy, but professional, put together, the wardrobe of someone who belonged in university chemistry labs. On January 2nd, Nia walked onto State University's campus for the first time in 3 years. The buildings looked the same, the pathways familiar, but everything felt different through eyes that had seen more, survived more, learned the hard difference between giving up and being forced to pause. She found the chemistry building, walked corridors she'd once navigated as a 20-year-old who thought the future was guaranteed. Now she was 32, a mother of 2, a woman who'd saved a billionaire's life and built a career from observation and courage. The other students looked impossibly young, fresh-faced and unburdened, and Nia felt ancient by comparison. Then she walked into advanced organic chemistry and saw 3 other adult students, all women, all carrying that same expression of determined uncertainty. They found each other immediately, gravitating together like elements seeking stable bonds. By the end of that first class, Nia had learned their names: Rebecca, who'd left school to care for a sick parent; Jasmine, who'd been deployed overseas with the military; Maria, who'd gotten pregnant at 19 and spent a decade raising kids before saving enough to return. "We're basically the non-traditional students club," Rebecca joked as they walked to the student union after class. "The ones who life interrupted." "Life didn't interrupt," Jasmine corrected. "Life just made us take the long route. We'll get there anyway." And Nia believed her. Believed it in the way she absorbed the lecture material, in the muscle memory of note-taking and question-asking, in the fierce joy of being challenged intellectually instead of just physically exhausted. This was what she'd been missing, what 3 years had stolen, what she was reclaiming with both hands and refusing to let go. Professor Whitmore, the same professor whose toxicology unit had given Nia the knowledge to identify thallium, remembered her immediately. He pulled her aside after class, his expression a mixture of surprise and satisfaction. "Nia Carrington, I heard rumors you'd been readmitted, but seeing you here feels like the universe correcting itself." He studied her with the same sharp attention she remembered. "You were one of my best students. When you withdrew, I wondered what happened to all that potential." "Life happened, family happened, survival happened." Nia met his gaze. "But I'm back, and I'm better than I was before." "Because of what you learned outside the classroom?" "Because of what I learned about what this knowledge is actually for. It's not just academic. It's not just career advancement. It's literally life-saving when applied correctly. I know that now in ways I couldn't have understood at 20. Professor Whitmore smiled, the kind of smile that suggested he knew exactly what she meant. "I look forward to seeing what you do with that understanding. And Nia, welcome back. The department is better with you in it." The semester fell into rhythm. Classes 3 days a week, studying in the library between sessions, work at Meridian the other 2 days, evenings with Marcus and Zara, weekends for research projects and catching up on sleep. It was intense, demanding, sometimes overwhelming, but Nia had learned to function under pressure, to stretch herself thin without breaking, to find strength in purpose. Diana proved to be everything Nia had hoped. The kids adored her, came home talking about the science experiments she'd helped Marcus conduct, the art techniques she'd taught Zara, the conversations about dreams and futures, and the wide world beyond their apartment. And when Nia arrived home after long days, Diana had dinner ready, homework completed, and insights about the kids that only came from really paying attention. "Marcus is worried about you," Diana said one evening, staying late to talk after the kids were in bed. "He doesn't say it directly, but I can see it. He's afraid you're working too hard, that something will happen and everything will fall apart again." Nia's heart clenched. "I thought I was hiding the stress better than that." "You are. But he's 11, and he's been paying attention to you his whole life. He knows when you're tired, when you're worried, when you're pushing past your limits." Diana's expression was gentle. "Maybe include him more? Let him see that the hard work has a purpose, that tired doesn't mean failing. Kids can handle truth better than they can handle uncertainty." So Nia started bringing Marcus to campus occasionally, letting him sit in on study groups, showing him the labs where she worked, introducing him to her professors and classmates. She let him see her struggling with difficult concepts, asking for help, persisting until understanding clicked into place. And gradually, his worry transformed into pride. into the recognition that his mother wasn't just surviving anymore. She was building something that would last. February brought midterms, and Naya discovered that adult student brain worked differently than 20-year-old brain. She processed concepts more slowly but retained them more deeply, connected classroom theory to real-world application automatically, asked better questions because she understood how knowledge translated to action. Her grades reflected it, straight A's across all 4 courses, with professors writing comments about insight and maturity and the kind of analytical thinking that came from life experience. It was during the midterm period that Graham called with news about the trial. It's scheduled for April. 3 weeks of testimony, expert witnesses, the full production. The prosecutors are building a case around premeditation, sophistication of method, abuse of trust. They want you on the stand for at least a day, maybe 2. Nia closed her textbook, gave him her full attention. What would I need to testify about? The identification process. How you recognize symptoms the medical team missed. How you were dismissed when you raised concerns. How you documented evidence and persisted despite resistance. They want to establish that without your intervention, I'd be dead, and Calvin would have gotten away with murder. That's dramatic. That's accurate. Will you do it? Naya thought about standing in a courtroom, about making her observations matter in a context where they'd be recorded, become part of public record, exist as evidence that invisible people could see what others missed. I'll do it, but I need the trial to work around my exam schedule. I'm not sacrificing my education for legal testimony, even if it's important. Of course. I'll have the prosecutors coordinate with your academic calendar. Naya, Graham's voice softened. Thank you. For this and for everything. You didn't just save my life. You changed how I see the world. That's a debt I'll never fully repay. Stop trying to repay it and just pay it forward. The fellowship, the hiring changes, the public health toxicology program, those matter more than gratitude. They're expressions of gratitude. You taught me that talent exists everywhere, but opportunity doesn't. I'm trying to fix that gap. The trial preparation consumed March. Lawyers coached Nia on testimony, on how to present technical information clearly, on maintaining composure under cross-examination. They warned her that Calvin's defense would try to discredit her, to paint her as an opportunist seeking attention, to question her expertise and her motives. Let them, Nia said calmly. My credentials speak for themselves, and if they want to argue that a housekeeper couldn't possibly identify sophisticated poisoning, that just proves the point about how we underestimate people based on their positions. The lead prosecutor, a sharp woman named Patricia Vance, smiled at that. You're going to be a strong witness. Just remember, stick to facts, don't get emotional, and trust that the truth is powerful enough on its own. But when April came and Nia walked into that courtroom, saw Calvin Price sitting at the defense table looking diminished and desperate, felt the weight of cameras and spectators and the machinery of justice grinding forward. She understood that truth was powerful, but presentation mattered too. She took the stand wearing her best professional clothes, raised her right hand, swore to tell the truth, and met Patricia Vance's eyes with steady confidence. Ms. Carrington, please tell the court your occupation at the time you identified Mr. Vale's poisoning. I was a housekeeper at Meridian Private Medical Center. Nia's voice carried clearly through the courtroom. I worked the night shift, cleaning patient rooms and common areas. And what is your educational background? I completed 2.5 years of a chemistry degree at State University before withdrawing in 2015 to care for my mother and support my family. I'm currently completing that degree. I'll graduate in December. Patricia walked her through the timeline. The smells she'd noticed, the symptoms she'd documented, the research she'd conducted, the moment she'd spoken up despite knowing she'd likely be dismissed. Nia testified with the same precision she brought to lab work, laying out observations and conclusions in clear, logical progression. When you first expressed concern about thallium poisoning to the medical staff, how did they respond? They dismissed me. Dr. Chen laughed. Dr. Holbrook told me to stay in my lane. Dr. Reeves was skeptical until I provided the scientific reasoning. Nia looked at the jury. They saw my uniform and assumed I couldn't possibly know more than specialists with medical degrees and decades of experience. But you did know more. In this specific instance, you had expertise they lacked. I had observation they lacked, I was paying attention to details they'd stopped seeing because they were focused on complex diagnoses and missed the simple answer sitting in plain sight. The cross-examination came next, Calvin's lawyer rising with the predatory confidence of someone preparing to discredit testimony. He was younger than Naya expected, sharp-suited and sharp-voiced, and his first question came loaded with implication. Ms. Carrington, isn't it true that you stand to benefit significantly from Mr. Vale's gratitude, financially and otherwise? I'm receiving educational support, yes, but I identified the poisoning before any discussion of compensation occurred. I spoke up because someone was dying and I had information that could save him. The support came later as Mr. Vale's choice, not as payment for testimony. A choice worth how much, approximately? Tuition, fees, childcare, and living expenses for 3 semesters. I haven't calculated the exact total. Over $100,000, correct? Possibly. Education is expensive. Nia met his eyes. But no amount of money changes the fact that thallium was in that hand cream and Mr. Price was the one who put it there. The lawyer shifted tactics. You claim to have expertise in toxicology, yet you never completed your degree. How do you justify calling yourself an expert? I don't call myself an expert. I call myself an observer with specialized knowledge. There's a difference. A difference that resulted in you, a housekeeper, overriding the professional judgment of 5 board-certified physicians. A difference that resulted in identifying poison those physicians had missed. Would you prefer I'd stayed silent and let Mr. Vale die to preserve professional hierarchies? The judge intervened before the lawyer could respond, instructing Naya to simply answer questions rather than pose them. But the point had landed. The jury had heard it, and when Nia left the stand 3 hours later, she saw respect in their faces, saw them looking at her like someone whose testimony mattered, whose observations carried weight. Graham testified the next day, speaking about friendship and betrayal, but also about systemic blindness, about how his company had missed talent because they only looked in expected places, about how close he'd come to dying because no one thought to listen to the housekeeper. The verdict came after 2 days of deliberation. Guilty on all counts. Attempted murder, assault with intent to kill, fraud. Calvin Price would spend the next 25 years in prison, his $40 million grievance becoming the most expensive mistake of his life. Nia wasn't in the courtroom when they read the verdict. She was taking a biochemistry exam, but Graham called her afterward, his voice carrying emotions too complex to name. It's over. He's going to prison. Justice was served. How do you feel? Sad, relieved, angry, grateful. Graham laughed, hollow. Mostly I feel like I understand now how fragile everything is, how quickly life can end, how easily we miss what matters, how the person who saves you might be the one you never noticed before. You notice now, Naya said quietly. That counts for something. It counts for everything. Thank you, Nia. For noticing. For speaking. For being brave when brave was terrifying. The semester ended with Nia's name on the dean's list. Her GPA restored to its former heights, her professors writing recommendations that emphasized not just intelligence but wisdom, not just knowledge but the character to use it well. She walked out of her last final exam feeling like she'd reclaimed something essential, something that went deeper than credentials or career prospects. She'd reclaimed herself. The version that existed before survival mode had stripped away everything except necessity. The version that could dream and strive and believe the future was something she could actively shape. Summer brought research work, a position Professor Whitmore had arranged in his toxicology lab, studying environmental contaminants and their long-term health effects. Naya spent her days analyzing soil samples, running chromatography tests, documenting patterns of exposure in communities near industrial sites. She was doing exactly what she'd imagined all those years ago, using chemistry to solve real problems, to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. And in the evenings, she worked with Graham's team to develop criteria for the Carrington Fellowship, reviewing applications from adults whose educations had been interrupted by illness, deployment, poverty, family crisis. Each application was a story like hers, talent deferred but not destroyed, potential waiting for someone to notice and invest. You're good at this, Doctor. Reeves observed during one selection committee meeting. seeing past the surface qualifications to the actual person underneath. I had practice being the person everyone looked past, Nia said. Makes it easier to recognize the same in others. They selected 43 fellows for the first cohort, engineers and nurses and computer scientists and teachers, people in their 30s and 40s and 50s who'd thought their chance had passed, who'd made peace with deferred dreams only to discover those dreams were just waiting for the right support. The program would pay for their education, provide childcare and living expenses, create pathways back into fields they'd been forced to leave. And every single one of them would carry forward the lesson Nia had learned in that hospital corridor. That invisible doesn't mean incapable, that hierarchy obscures as much talent as it elevates, that paying attention to the overlooked might be the most important skill any institution can develop. Fall semester brought advanced courses, deeper specialization, and the beginning of Nia's senior research project. She'd chosen to study detection methods for uncommon toxins in clinical settings, developing protocols that would help medical professionals identify poisonings they weren't specifically looking for. Professor Whitmore supervised the work, but the passion was all Nia's. This was personal, practical, the kind of research that could prevent the next Graham Vale from nearly dying before anyone noticed the obvious. Your methodology is sound, Whitmore told her during one lab session. But more than that, your motivation is clear. You're not just pursuing knowledge for its own sake. You're building tools that will save lives. That's the best kind of science. The research consumed her fall, data collection and analysis intertwined with her other courses, with work at Meridian, with being present for Marcus and Zara as they navigated their own growth. Marcus was thriving in advanced math, already talking about high school programs and college prep. Zara had discovered theater, was playing the lead in her school's production, was becoming the kind of confident that came from being seen and celebrated. They were all becoming more fully themselves, Nia realized. The versions of themselves that had always existed but hadn't had room to breathe under the weight of constant survival. Now there was space, financial, emotional, temporal, for growth instead of just endurance. December arrived cold and clear, the kind of weather that made Nia think about endings and beginnings, about cycles completing and new ones starting. Her final exams were scheduled for the second week, her thesis defense for the third, and then, if everything went according to plan, graduation on the 20th, 3 years after withdrawing, 13 years after starting. A chemistry degree that had cost more than tuition and fees could measure, that represented not just education but resurrection, not just achievement but reclamation. Nia studied in the library, surrounded by other students facing finals, and felt profoundly grateful for the chance to be here, to be one among many instead of invisible and alone. The degree would matter, would open doors, validate expertise, create opportunities that credentials alone could unlock. But what mattered more was the journey that had brought her here. The courage to speak when silence was safer. The refusal to let dismissal become silence. The understanding that she'd always been capable, and the world had simply failed to look. Her phone buzzed. Graham's number. "Dr. Carrington," he said, deliberate emphasis on the title she hadn't earned yet. "How's the studying?" "Almost there. One more final, then the thesis defense, then hopefully the walk across that stage." "I'll be there. Front row if they let me." "You saved my life, Nia. Watching you graduate feels like witnessing the sequel, the part where the hero doesn't just save someone else, but reclaims her own story." Nia smiled, feeling the weight of his words, the truth of his observation. "It's a good sequel. Better than the alternative." "The alternative was you staying invisible forever. The world couldn't afford that. Neither could you." And he was right. The world needed people who paid attention, who spoke up, who refused to let hierarchy dictate truth. Needed systems that elevated the overlooked instead of just recycling the already visible. That was the real poison Calvin Price had tried to use. Not just thallium, but the assumption that some people mattered more than others, that wealth and position conferred not just privilege, but worth. Nia had proven that assumption wrong, had saved a life, and in doing so, demonstrated that invisible people could be essential, that expertise came in unexpected packages, that paying attention to those we've been trained to ignore wasn't just moral, but practical. The sequel wasn't just her graduation. It was every person the Carrington Fellowship would support. Every case of unusual poisoning her research would help identify. Every time someone in a position of power remembered to actually see the people making their world function. That was legacy. That was justice. That was transformation that rippled outward far beyond one woman's second chance. And it all started with the courage to speak up in a hospital hallway, to trust her own expertise over institutional authority, to believe that being right mattered more than being comfortable. The rest, the degree, the career, the fellowship, the future, was just what happened when invisible finally, permanently, became impossible to ignore. The thesis defense took place in a small conference room on the 4th floor of the chemistry building, with Professor Whitmore and 2 other faculty members sitting across from Nia like judges at a trial. She'd spent 3 months developing detection protocols for uncommon toxins in clinical settings, running hundreds of tests, documenting patterns that could help emergency room physicians identify poisonings they weren't trained to recognize. The innovation here isn't just the methodology, Nia explained, clicking through her presentation slides. It's the accessibility. Most toxicology protocols assume specialized equipment and trained personnel. I've designed these tests to work with materials available in any standard hospital lab. A nurse with basic chemistry knowledge could run them. An ER doctor under time pressure could interpret the results. Professor Whitmore leaned forward. Walk us through the thallium detection protocol specifically. How does your method improve on existing approaches? Nia pulled up the relevant data. Current methods require sending samples to specialized labs, which means waiting hours or days for results. My protocol uses colorimetric analysis with reagents that are already stocked in most hospital pharmacies. Results in under 30 minutes. It's not as precise as mass spectrometry, but it's fast enough to matter when someone's dying and you need to know what you're treating. And you tested this protocol on actual patient samples? One of the other professors asked. With IRB approval and patient consent, yes. 12 cases over 3 months at Meridian Private Medical, all patients presenting with unexplained symptoms that stumped initial diagnostics. 3 came back positive for environmental toxin exposure that standard panels had missed. We were able to adjust treatment protocols immediately instead of waiting days for specialized testing. The questions continued for 90 minutes, probing methodology and limitations, challenging assumptions, and exploring applications. Nia answered with the confidence of someone who'd lived this research, who understood that the science wasn't abstract but urgently practical, who'd watched her protocols save actual lives in real time. When the faculty finally dismissed her to deliberate, Professor Whitmore's expression gave nothing away. Nia waited in the hallway, her heart hammering, trying not to think about what happened if they rejected her thesis, if 3 years of work and struggle ended in a failed defense and no degree. Marcus and Zara sat on a bench nearby, Diana between them, all 3 of them offering silent support. Marcus had insisted on being here, had skipped school with permission to watch his mother defend work he didn't fully understand but recognized as important. Zara had brought a good luck drawing, a portrait of Nia in a lab coat, surrounded by chemical equations and hearts. "You did great, Mom," Marcus said. "I could tell by their faces. They were impressed." "How could you tell?" "They stopped asking questions to trip you up and started asking questions because they were actually curious. That's when you know you've won." 11 years old and already reading academic politics. Nia pulled him close, ruffled Zara's hair, and tried to breathe normally while the faculty decided her fate. The door opened. Professor Whitmore stepped out, his expression carefully neutral, and Nia's stomach dropped. Then he smiled. "Congratulations, Dr. Carrington. Your defense was exceptional. The committee voted unanimously to accept your thesis with highest honors." The sound Zara made was somewhere between a squeal and a shout. Marcus hugged Nia hard enough to crack ribs. Diana was crying, actually crying, and Nia realized she was crying too, big messy tears that came from a place deeper than academic achievement. This was vindication, validation, the formal acknowledgement that she'd always been capable, that the 3-year detour hadn't been failure but just postponement, that invisible had become undeniable through persistence and courage, and the refusal to accept that her story ended with a housekeeping uniform. "We've also nominated your thesis for the Departmental Research Award," Professor Whitmore continued. "The winner gets announced at graduation. I can't promise anything, but between you and me, I'd start preparing an acceptance speech." Graduation was 5 days away. 5 days to finish final papers, pack up her lab space, prepare for the ceremony that would mark the official end of student life and the beginning of whatever came next. Nia moved through those days in a daze of completion, tying up loose ends and saying goodbye to classmates who'd become friends, to professors who'd become mentors, to a version of herself that had been defined by striving and uncertainty. The woman who would walk across that stage was different, credentialed now, authorized to call herself a chemist without qualification or apology, ready to step into the role Graham had been holding for her, director of the Vail Industries Public Health Toxicology Initiative, a position that would let her build the systems she'd imagined, the programs that would prevent others from dying while knowledge walked past them unseen. The night before graduation, Nia couldn't sleep. She stood at her window looking out at the city, thinking about the path that had brought her here, the mother's stroke that had forced her to withdraw, the 3 years of night shifts and invisibility, the moment she'd smelled something wrong in sweet 1847 and chosen to investigate instead of ignore, the courage to speak up despite knowing she'd be dismissed, the vindication when she'd been right. Every choice had led to this moment. Every hardship had built the character that made her effective, made her notice what others missed, made her understand that expertise without compassion was incomplete and credentials without wisdom were hollow. Her phone buzzed. A text from Graham. "Can't sleep either, too excited for tomorrow. You've earned this 1,000 times over. The world is about to get the chemist it needs and the advocate it deserves." Another text from Dr. Reeves. "Proud doesn't begin to cover it. You changed how I practice medicine, changed how this entire hospital thinks about who has valuable knowledge. That's impact that will outlive all of us." And one from Rebecca, her fellow non-traditional student who is also graduating tomorrow. "We did it, the ones who life interrupted. We found our way back and we're finishing stronger than we started. That's not just achievement, that's resurrection." Resurrection. Nia liked that word. It captured something essential about what these 3 years had been, about dying to one version of herself and rising as another, about transformation that went deeper than degrees or job titles. She'd been invisible. Now she was essential. She'd been dismissed. Now she was sought after. She'd been powerless. Now she was building programs that would shift how institutions recognized and elevated overlooked talent. That was resurrection. That was justice. That was the future she'd fought for, becoming the present she inhabited. Graduation morning arrived with winter sunshine and air so cold it hurt to breathe. Nia dressed carefully in the black dress she'd bought for this occasion, the one that made her look professional and proud, that announced she belonged in spaces that once would have excluded her. She pinned on the honor cords that marked her academic achievement: gold for highest honors, silver for the chemistry department award she'd won, green for the fellowship she'd received. Marcus and Zara helped her arrange her cap and gown, their faces solemn with the recognition that this was important, that their mother crossing the stage would change their futures too. "Do we get to call you doctor now?" Zara asked, adjusting Nia's tassel. "Not that kind of doctor. I'm a doctor of chemistry, not a medical doctor." "Still counts," Marcus said firmly. "You're Dr. Carrington now. That's real." The ceremony was held in the university's main auditorium, a massive space filled with graduates and families and the institutional weight of tradition. Nia sat with the other chemistry majors, listening to speeches about achievement and potential and the responsibility that came with education. The words washed over her, meaningful but secondary to the reality of being here, of having made it, of proving that interrupted didn't mean ended. When they called her name, Nia Marie Carrington, Doctor of Chemistry, summa cum laude, recipient of the Departmental Research Excellence Award, she walked across that stage with her head high and her shoulders back, shook hands with the dean, accepted her diploma in its leather folder, and looked out at the audience where Marcus and Zara were screaming her name like she'd won the Olympics. Graham was there too, front row as promised, standing and applauding with an enthusiasm that made nearby graduates' families look twice. Dr. Reeves sat beside him, her face radiating pride. Diana was crying again, holding up her phone to record every second. And scattered through the audience were people Nia recognized from Meridian, nurses and administrators, and even a few physicians who'd learned the hard way that expertise came in unexpected packages. The reception afterward was chaos in the best way. Marcus and Zara showed Nia's diploma to everyone who'd stand still long enough, their pride so fierce it made her chest ache. Graham appeared with champagne for the adults and sparkling cider for the kids, toasting to second chances and futures that were just beginning. "Monday, you start officially," he said, clinking his glass against Nia's. "Director Carrington has a nice ring to it." "It's terrifying," Nia admitted. "Building a program from scratch, creating protocols, hiring staff, establishing partnerships with hospitals and community clinics. What if I can't do it? What if I'm better at observation than administration?" "Then you'll hire people who are good at administration and focus on what you do best, seeing what others miss, and building systems to make sure those observations matter." Graham's expression was serious despite the celebratory atmosphere. "You're not doing this alone, Nia. I'm giving you resources, staff, authority. Your job is to have the vision. Other people can handle the logistics." Dr. Reeves joined them, her own glass raised. "To the woman who taught us all to pay attention, may we never again be so blind that we miss the obvious just because it comes from an unexpected source." They drank to that, and Nia felt the weight of responsibility settling alongside the pride. She'd been given a platform, resources, authority. What she did with it would determine whether Graham's investment paid off, whether the Carrington Fellowship became a model for other institutions, whether her moment of courage became a lasting legacy of change. Professor Whitmore found her as the reception was winding down, his expression carrying something beyond professional pride. "I need to tell you something," he said, drawing her aside. "When you withdrew in 2015, I tried to find funding to keep you enrolled. Applied for emergency grants, talked to the financial aid office, even considered covering your tuition myself. But you'd already left, already made your choice, and I didn't want to insult you by offering charity when you'd made a decision based on family responsibility." Nia felt tears threatening again. "I didn't know that." "You weren't supposed to, but I've thought about you often over the years. Wondered what happened to the brilliant student who'd disappeared. Whether you'd found another path, whether the potential I saw had been wasted." He smiled. "Seeing you walk across that stage today, knowing what you accomplished to get here, understanding the impact you'll have going forward, it's the best possible ending to a story I thought was tragic." "It's not an ending," Nia corrected gently. "It's a beginning. Everything up until now was just preparation." The celebration continued into the evening, moving from the university to a restaurant Graham had reserved, where 40 people gathered to honor Nia's achievement and toast her future. The Carrington Fellowship recipients were there, the first cohort who'd started their own educational journeys thanks to Nia's example. They surrounded her with stories of how the fellowship had changed their lives, how having the support to return to school had rekindled dreams they'd thought were dead. "You gave us permission to try again," one woman said, a former nurse returning to complete her medical degree. "By succeeding despite everything stacked against you, you showed us it was possible. That's worth more than the money, though the money helps. It's the hope. The proof that interrupted doesn't mean finished." As the evening wound down and guests began departing, Graham pulled Nia aside one final time. "I have something for you. Call it a graduation gift." He handed her a small box, the kind that held jewelry or other precious things. Inside was a key. Not a normal house key, but something more ornate, symbolic. "It's the key to the new toxicology center," Graham explained. "We broke ground 3 months ago. It'll be ready by March. State-of-the-art labs, consultation spaces, training facilities, everything you need to build the program you've envisioned. And above the entrance, there's going to be a plaque." He pulled out his phone, showed her a rendering. The building was beautiful, modern glass and steel, designed to welcome rather than intimidate. And above the main entrance, carved in stone, the Carrington Center for Public Health Toxicology, where observation becomes action. Nia couldn't speak. The scope of it, the permanence, the fact that her name would be on a building dedicated to the work she'd imagined. It was too much, and exactly right all at once. "You deserve this," Graham said quietly. "Not because you saved my life, though that matters, but because you saw a need and refused to accept that it was someone else's job to address it. That's leadership. That's innovation. That's exactly the spirit this center needs to embody." "I don't know how to thank you." "Stop thanking me. Start building. Hire the best people. Create the best protocols." Train the next generation of toxicologists who understand that their job isn't just running tests, but actually seeing patients, seeing contexts, seeing the details that standard diagnostics miss. Graham's voice carried the intensity that had built empires. Make this center everything you wished had existed when I was dying. Make it impossible for the next Calvin Price to succeed because too many people are paying attention for poison to hide. The ride home was quiet. Marcus and Zara had fallen asleep in the back seat, exhausted from celebration, Diana driving carefully through late-night streets. Nia held her diploma in one hand and the key to the toxicology center in the other, physical proof that the last 3 years had been real, that transformation was possible, that invisible could become essential when courage met opportunity. At home, she tucked the kids into bed, hung her diploma on the wall where they could see it every morning, and finally let herself fully feel the magnitude of what had happened. She'd done it. Against odds that had seemed insurmountable, against a system designed to keep people like her in positions like housekeeper, against the voice in her own head that had whispered she should stay quiet and safe and invisible. She'd spoken up, persisted, reclaimed her education and built a future that would ripple outward far beyond her own life. The following Monday, Nia walked into Vail Industries headquarters for her first day as director of the Public Health Toxicology Initiative. Her office was on the 14th floor, with windows overlooking the city and a desk larger than her apartment's kitchen. Waiting for her were 3 staff members Graham had already hired: a program coordinator, a lab manager, and a community outreach specialist, all of them looking to Nia for direction, for vision, for leadership. She called her first meeting, spread out her research and ideas, and began building the program she'd imagined. Partnerships with emergency rooms in underserved neighborhoods, training modules for physicians and nurses, a consultation hotline where medical professionals could call with unusual cases, mobile testing units that could bring toxicology expertise to communities that couldn't afford specialists. The goal, Nia explained to her team, is to democratize access to expertise, to make sure that the next person being poisoned gets identified quickly, regardless of whether they can afford private hospitals and personal physicians, to train medical staff to recognize patterns they weren't taught to see, to make invisible threats visible before they become fatal. Her staff took notes, asked questions, offered ideas that built on Nia's vision. They were good people, smart and committed, and Nia realized that Graham had been right. She didn't have to do this alone. Her job was to provide direction. Others could handle the execution. By the end of that first week, they had partnerships with 6 hospitals, training sessions scheduled for March, and a pilot program launching in April. The work was intense, demanding, sometimes overwhelming, but Nia had learned to function under pressure, to build systems while managing chaos, to lead without losing sight of why the work mattered. February brought the opening of the Carrington Fellowship's second application cycle. Over 3,000 people applied: engineers and teachers, nurses and social workers, artists and scientists, all of them carrying stories of interrupted education and deferred dreams. Nia sat on the selection committee, reading applications late into the night, seeing herself in every story of someone who'd chosen family over education, survival over advancement, responsibility over personal ambition. They could fund 60 fellows this year, up from 43 the previous year. 60 lives changed, 60 futures rekindled, 60 people who'd proved that talent didn't disappear just because life interrupted. The selection process was agonizing. So many worthy candidates, so many stories that deserved support. But Nia approached it with the same precision she brought to toxicology, looking for the people who'd not just benefit from the fellowship, but pay it forward, who'd become advocates and leaders and examples in their own communities. "You're building an army," Dr. Reeves observed during one selection meeting. "An army of people who understand what it means to be overlooked and are determined to change the systems that overlook them." "Not an army," Nia corrected. "A movement. Armies conquer. Movements transform." March brought the opening of the Carrington Center, a ribbon-cutting ceremony attended by press and politicians and people whose lives had already been touched by the work being done. Graham gave a speech about second chances and paying attention. Dr. Reeves spoke about how one housekeeper's observation had changed how Meridian approached diagnosis. And Nia, standing at the podium with her kids in the front row and her team behind her, talked about what the center represented. This building exists because I refused to accept that knowledge without credentials was worthless. Because I insisted that what I observed mattered even when everyone told me to stay quiet. Because one man had the humility to recognize that being saved by a housekeeper meant rethinking everything he assumed about talent and hierarchy and worth. She paused, letting her words settle. But this center isn't about me or my story. It's about every person who's ever been dismissed because their expertise came in an unexpected package. Every nurse who's seen something doctors missed. Every paramedic who's recognized patterns physicians overlooked. Every community health worker who's understood their neighborhood's needs better than any specialist consultant. She gestured to the building behind her, glass and steel gleaming in afternoon sun. This center says their observations matter. Their knowledge counts. Their voices deserve to be heard. We're building systems that don't just tolerate input from unexpected sources. We're actively seeking it out because we've learned the hard way that genius exists everywhere but only gets recognized in narrow, credentialed spaces. The applause was thunderous, but what mattered more to Nia was the look on Marcus and Zara's faces, pride mixed with understanding, the recognition that their mother hadn't just achieved something personal, but was building something that would outlast her, that would change how institutions valued people, that would make sure invisible became impossible to ignore. That spring, the Toxicology Center's consultation hotline fielded its first call. An ER doctor in a community hospital dealing with a patient presenting with symptoms that didn't match any standard diagnosis. Nia talked him through the observation protocol, suggested tests he could run with available resources, and within 2 hours they'd identified carbon monoxide poisoning from a faulty home heating system. The patient survived. The family was notified about the danger. The heating system was repaired. And one life was saved because a doctor in an underfunded emergency room had someone to call, someone who'd answer, someone who understood that fast answers mattered more than perfect protocols. That was impact. That was the work mattering in real time. The cases kept coming. By summer, the center had consulted on 43 unusual toxicology cases, identifying poisonings and exposures that would have been missed or taken days to diagnose. They'd trained over 200 medical professionals in rapid identification protocols. They'd established partnerships with 23 hospitals across 3 states. And they'd published research that was changing how emergency medicine approached environmental toxin exposure. Nia's days were full: program management, case consultations, training development, research publication. But she made sure her evenings belonged to Marcus and Zara, that success didn't mean disappearing into work the way poverty had once meant disappearing into multiple jobs. They had dinner together every night. She helped with homework, attended Marcus's robotics competitions and Zara's theater performances, maintained the presence that mattered more than any professional achievement. "You're different now," Marcus observed one evening while they were reviewing his algebra homework. "Not just busier, more settled, like you finally fit in your own life." Nia thought about that. He was right. For 3 years, she'd been living in survival mode. Every decision dictated by necessity. Every moment shadowed by the awareness that one mistake could unravel everything. Now there was space, financial security, professional recognition, the confidence that came from proving she belonged in spaces that once excluded her. "I'm who I was always supposed to be," she said finally. "It just took a while to get here." Fall brought the Carrington Fellowship's first graduation. 8 fellows had completed their degrees: engineers and nurses, a social worker, a computer scientist, all of them walking across stages in their own ceremonies, holding diplomas that represented second chances and supported dreams. Nia attended every graduation she could, watched them accept their credentials, saw their families celebrating just as Marcus and Zara had celebrated hers. This was legacy. Not just her own achievement, but the system she'd built to multiply that achievement, to make sure others didn't have to wait as long or fight as hard or nearly let someone die before being noticed. The first anniversary of Calvin Price's conviction came in October. Nia didn't mark it publicly, but she thought about how one man's greed had set in motion changes that rippled far beyond his crime. He'd tried to kill Graham and ended up catalyzing transformation, exposing hierarchies that needed dismantling, revealing blindnesses that needed correcting. She wondered if he understood that sitting in his cell. If he recognized that his attempt to preserve $40 million in stock value had resulted in a $50 million fellowship that would help thousands of people, a toxicology center that was saving lives, a movement toward recognizing expertise wherever it existed. Probably not. People like Calvin rarely saw beyond their own grievances. But people like Graham did. He'd taken his near-death experience and turned it into institutional change, restructured his company to value talent over credentials, funded programs that elevated the overlooked, become an advocate for recognizing expertise in unexpected places. That was the difference between them. Calvin had seen injustice to himself and responded with murder. Graham had seen his own complicity in injustice and responded with transformation. December brought Nia's first work anniversary, and Graham marked it with a team meeting where he announced the next phase of expansion. The Toxicology Center was going national, with satellite facilities planned for 5 major cities. The Carrington Fellowship was doubling its capacity. And Nia was being promoted to Vice President of Public Health Initiatives, overseeing not just toxicology but environmental health, occupational safety, and community medicine programs. "You've proven the model works," Graham told her privately after the announcement. "Started with your observation in a hospital room, built a program that saved lives and changed how we think about expertise. Now we're scaling it, making sure every community has access to the kind of attention and insight that saved my life." Nia felt the weight of it, the responsibility, the opportunity, the chance to build something that would outlast her and touch lives she'd never meet. It was terrifying and exhilarating and exactly what she'd been working toward without fully realizing it. "I'm going to need a bigger team," she said. "Hire whoever you need. Budget's not a constraint. Impact is the only metric that matters." That Christmas was different from the one 2 years ago. They'd moved to a new apartment, 2 bedrooms, so Marcus and Zara finally had their own spaces, in a neighborhood with good schools and a park nearby. The tree they decorated was real instead of plastic. The gifts underneath were generous without being excessive, chosen for meaning rather than price. And when they sat down for dinner, Nia looked at her kids and felt gratitude so profound it hurt. They'd made it. Not just survived, but actually made it to a place where the future was something to anticipate rather than fear, where possibilities exceeded limits, where dreams were plans instead of fantasies. "What are you thinking about, Mom?" Zara asked, catching Nia's expression. "I'm thinking about how far we've come, how much has changed, how grateful I am that I paid attention that night in the hospital." Nia smiled at her children, these brilliant, resilient humans who'd survived hardship and emerged stronger. "And I'm thinking about how many other families are having better Christmases because we built programs that give people second chances. That's the best present I could ask for." New Year's brought reflection and planning. Nia sat at her desk in the Carrington Center, reviewing the year's impact reports. 63 lives saved through rapid toxin identification. 220 medical professionals trained in observation protocols. 103 fellowship recipients completing their educations. Countless families changed because someone had invested in overlooked talent. And it was just beginning. The satellite centers would multiply the impact. The fellowship expansion would help more people. The research being conducted would change how medicine approached environmental health. The movement Nia had started, one observation, one moment of courage, was becoming institutional, embedded in structures that would persist long after she was gone. Professor Whitmore visited in January, touring the center and marveling at what his former student had built. "When you were in my class, I knew you were brilliant," he said, standing in the main lab where researchers analyzed samples and developed protocols. "But I couldn't have predicted this. You didn't just become a good chemist, you became a force for changing how we recognize and develop talent." "You taught me to pay attention," Nia said simply. "To notice patterns, trust observations, ask questions that others missed. I'm just applying those lessons at a bigger scale." "You're being modest. What you've built here goes far beyond individual achievement. You're creating systems that catch the talent that traditional systems miss. That's not chemistry, that's social innovation." Maybe he was right. Maybe what Nia had really been doing all along wasn't just science, but justice. Not just observation, but transformation. Not just building a career, but dismantling the hierarchies that had almost cost Graham his life, and had definitely cost countless others theirs. Spring brought Marcus's acceptance to a prestigious high school program for students interested in engineering and aerospace. Zara won an art competition that came with a scholarship to summer programs. Both of them were thriving in ways that wouldn't have been possible without the stability Nia had fought for, the security she'd built, the future she'd reclaimed. "They're going to be okay," Diana said one afternoon, watching the kids work on homework together. "More than okay. They're going to be extraordinary, because they watched you refuse to accept limits, watched you fight for what you deserved, watched you build something meaningful from courage and observation." "They were always going to be extraordinary," Nia corrected. "I just made sure poverty wouldn't stop them." But she knew Diana was right. Marcus and Zara had learned lessons that went beyond academics, that invisible could become essential, that speaking up mattered even when it was scary, that talent deserved recognition regardless of where it came from. They'd carry those lessons forward, become advocates and leaders in their own ways, pay forward the investment that had changed their mother's life. That was legacy too. Not just programs and buildings, but children who understood that the world's hierarchies were lies, that worth wasn't determined by position, that observation and courage could change everything. On the second anniversary of identifying Graham's poisoning, Nia stood in Suite 1847 at Meridian. It had been converted into a training space for the patient advocacy program, where hospital staff learned the observation protocols Nia had developed. The room that had almost been a death chamber was now a classroom for preventing other deaths, for teaching people to see what they'd been trained to overlook. Dr. Reeves found her there, understanding without words why Nia had come. "It started here," Dr. Reeves said quietly. "Your courage, our humility, the recognition that we'd been blind to expertise because it came from someone we'd dismissed. And now it's become something bigger, something that makes sure the next person won't be dismissed. The next observation won't be ignored." Nia looked around the room, remembering how small she'd felt standing here 2 years ago, how uncertain, how aware that speaking up might cost her everything. She'd spoken anyway, and the world had changed because of it. "Thank you," Dr. Reeves said, "for not staying silent, for trusting what you knew even when we treated your knowledge as worthless, for being brave when brave was terrifying. You saved Graham's life, but you saved something else too. Our ability to see clearly, to recognize expertise wherever it exists, to understand that hierarchy obscures as much as it reveals." Nia left Meridian that evening feeling complete. The journey from invisible to essential was over. Now she was just living in the aftermath, building on the foundation that courage had created, making sure others wouldn't have to fight as hard, or wait as long, or risk as much. Years would pass. The Carrington Fellowship would help thousands of students reclaim interrupted educations. The toxicology centers would save countless lives through rapid identification of unusual poisonings. The public health programs would transform how communities accessed expertise and care. And Nia's name would be attached to all of it, not as monument to individual achievement, but as reminder that observation mattered, that courage counted, that invisible people could become essential when someone finally paid attention. But on this evening, walking to her car in the parking lot where she'd once parked to clock in for housekeeping shifts, Nia just felt grateful. Grateful for the nose that had smelled something wrong. Grateful for the knowledge that had recognized the pattern. Grateful for the courage that had made her speak despite knowing she'd be dismissed. Grateful for the moment that had changed everything, not just for her, but for everyone who'd come after. She drove home to Marcus and Zara, to the life she'd built from observation and courage, to the future that had seemed impossible until she'd refused to accept impossibility. And as the city lights blurred past her window, Nia Carrington, Dr. Carrington now, Director Carrington, the woman who'd saved a billionaire and built a movement, allowed herself to smile. The invisible witness had become impossible to ignore, and the world was better for it.